It was said later that the child princess escaped death as if by a whisper of the wind, a small exhalation of mercy in the midst of war's cruel roar. But in truth, Rhaenys Targaryen's survival was not a mere accident. On the day King's Landing fell, when Lannister soldiers poured through the city streets, setting alight the cottages and alleyways, and the Red Keep came under siege, every living soul within those walls braced for the end. The devastation was merciless. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen had already perished on the Trident. His wife, Elia Martell, and their 2 children, Rhaenys and Aegon, were thought to be at the mercy of Tywin Lannister's men. History would claim that both children were murdered, that Elia died with them, left in bloody ruin upon the cold stones. But sometimes history's telling is incomplete, shaped more by those with power than by the truth that lurks in the shadows. Rhaenys lived, and that single fact would, in time, change the course of the 7 kingdoms. She did not remember the details of her rescue, nor had she known the names of the people responsible for spiriting her away. She recalled vague sensations in her earliest memory: the smell of smoke and burning flesh, the sounds of men bellowing, and her mother's shriek quickly choked off. There was a flash of Lannister crimson in the hall, a harsh glare of sunlight, and then she was placed in a crate of sorts. Darkness seized her. The musty smell of sawdust filled her nostrils. For hours, maybe days, she rode in that cramped space, hungry and confused. She dozed, awoke, and dozed again until the jolting movement stopped. Years later, she learned that a handful of servants still loyal to the Targaryens had switched her with another slain child. Some unfortunate girl with black hair and large eyes, a street urchin or an orphan who had been murdered for the ruse. Or so the rumors went. One rumor told that a man was hired by Varys to whisk Rhaenys to safety through secret passages. Another whispered that the Mad Crow of House Blackwood had a role in it, sending gold to bribe a Lannister captain. There were many such whisperings, all half conjecture, none wholly verifiable. Indeed, Rhaenys was hidden even from herself. For a long while, she did not know she was anything but a frightened child in the care of strangers. Her first true recollections began somewhere in the heart of Dorne, a small fortress perched on a rocky hillside, scorched by the blazing Dornish sun. She was brought forth from that crate into a dusty yard, and a tall, slender woman with a trailing black veil pressed a cup of water to her lips. That woman called her girl, not princess, nor any other name. She was refused knowledge of her past. At night, Rhaenys slept in a cramped stone cell that she shared with scorpions and spiders. Some days she was taught to scrub floors, to mend clothes. She could scarcely read, though once as a toddler in the Red Keep, she had been taught her letters by a kindly septa, and she retained enough of that to struggle through childlike scrawl. If she asked questions about who she was, the black-veiled woman would pinch her lips and say, "You are no one. You are lucky to be alive." It was not unkind exactly. It was raw truth, delivered in a place where truth was more precious than courtesy. But Rhaenys felt something stir inside her with each passing day, a sense of something lost. She saw it in the suspicious glances from the fortress inhabitants, guardsmen in blackened sand tabards, watchers perched on the high ramparts. Her hair was the color of deepest midnight, her eyes dark, reminiscent of her mother's heritage from Dorne. She was taller than many girls her age and possessed an undeniable grace when she walked. Sometimes in her chores, as she bent over scrubbing, the others would point. They had guesses, perhaps. Whispers of Targaryen occasionally found their way to her ears in hushed corners. And though she did not fully grasp the meaning, she felt a sting of truth to the word. In time, the black-veiled woman introduced herself as Ilaria. Not Ilaria Sand, but someone else from that extended family. She never confirmed or denied it. Still, it was rumored that she too had been hidden away, a lady's maid who had served House Martell long ago. When the fateful day arrived, the day that everything changed, Rhaenys was cleaning an old scimitar in the yard. She was no older than 10, a scrawny, tangle-haired girl with bruised knees and a solemn gaze. Ilaria approached her swiftly, face taut, lips clamped tight. "The day has come," she said, voice trembling with the gravity of what was about to happen. Then, She reached out, pried the scimitar from Rhaenys' hand, and pressed a length of black cloth into her arms. "Wrap yourself in this. We ride at dusk." Under the veil of night, they fled that fortress. Just the two of them, and a donkey that trotted laboriously along the sand-lashed roads. Rhaenys' heart hammered with anticipation, though she did not understand what fate awaited her. She shivered, though the desert air was still warm, and the night sky overhead shone with a million stars. Fear laced through her veins, and her breath quickened each time the donkey's hooves struck the rocky path. Part of her wanted to run back, though she had no love for that lonely fortress. Anything felt safer than the unknown. After many nights of travel, they reached a hidden cove by the coast. A ship waited, sails furled, rigging silent except for the faint creak of the wood. The captain was a man with a smooth, kindly face and silver in his hair. He greeted Illyria with a solemn nod, then spoke quietly as they helped Rhaenys aboard. No words of explanation were offered to her. She only knew they sailed for Essos. When dawn broke across the shimmering sea, she leaned over the ship's railing, salt-laced wind in her hair, and felt the faintest tingle of something akin to hope. They arrived in the free city of Braavos days later. Its labyrinth of canals and dark lagoon offered anonymity amidst the bustle of travelers and merchants. There, in a modest house, overlooking a quiet canal, Rhaenys' life took shape anew. Illyria introduced her to a man named Rhaenys, a Braavosi sword master of some repute. He too never addressed her by her name, never called her princess. Instead, he referred to her as the girl. Yet he set about training her in the Braavosi style of swordsmanship, with thin blades that flickered like quicksilver. The lessons were punishing, leaving bruises on her forearms and soreness in her shoulders. But Rhaenys was determined to make sense of her existence. Deep inside, she believed that these hardships were forging her for something important, something grand. Sometimes, when she managed to best Rhaelyn in a round, the old swordmaster would grin. "You have Martell's fury," he once said, "and Targaryen's perseverance. That's a rare mixture, girl." Though she yearned to question him, to confirm her identity, she sensed that he would not share more than a teasing remark. Illyria would hush her whenever she sought answers, so she gleaned what she could from offhanded remarks and glances. But she kept that knowledge tucked in her heart. In time, she turned 15. The city's swirling tides of commerce and gossip did not concern her, though she sometimes heard rumors of Westerosi travelers seeking passage east, or the word Targaryen breathed in smoky taverns, when men spoke of the exiled Prince Viserys and his young sister Daenerys. The talk was always tinged with scorn or curiosity. These last Targaryens, said to be wandering Essos in search of an army. Rhaenys drank in every rumor, every stray detail, like a wanderer in the desert gulping water. She had heard that Daenerys was just a babe when she fled, whisked away after the sack. Viserys was older, proud, and often angry. Rhaenys thought of them as her cousins. In truth, Daenerys was her aunt, but the age difference was so small that the relationship felt more like a sisterhood. She wondered if they even knew she existed, or if they too believed she had died. Did anyone in Westeros suspect she still lived? Still, the years rolled on. She grew taller, her face sharper, her gaze resolute. The Braavosi style gave her a fluid grace, a dancer's poise. Yet all the while, she felt a gnawing restlessness, as if her destiny waited across the sea. Then one day she returned from the canal markets to find Illyria's face stricken with grief. The older woman handed her a scroll, the wax unsealed, and watched Rhaenys' eyes widen as she read the words. King Robert Baratheon ruled in King's Landing, it said. House Lannister stood at his side. The remnants of Targaryen power languished in exile. Viserys Targaryen still sought to reclaim the Iron Throne, hawking his sister in marriage to warlords. Rhaenys' mouth went dry. Illyria whispered, "They have forgotten you, my princess. They do not even speak your name." That night, Rhaenys burned with feverish dreams. She saw a dragon with black wings crying out against a great crimson sky. In the dream she stood upon a shore of black sand, the tide lapping at her feet, the wind tangling her hair. The dragon soared overhead, screeching a call that echoed in her bones. When she awoke, she knew it was time to return. Not then, not immediately. But soon. She had a claim, by the gods. She had a claim. She was the eldest child of Rhaegar Targaryen, the rightful heir after her father's line. Yet Robert wore the crown, and the Lannisters held the city. The realm believed her dead, and in a sense, that gave her an advantage. If she could gather allies, if she could reveal herself at the right moment, perhaps she could sway the lords who had grown weary of King Robert's excesses. Or so she dared to hope. Ellaria confessed that she had preserved Rhaenys' life at the behest of Doran Martell, Prince of Dorne, who grieved for his sister Elia and wanted to ensure that at least one of her children might survive. But Doran had offered no official support for her. He had watched quietly from Sunspear for years, nursing old resentments against the crown. Now, the time was ripe for action, Ellaria said. If Rhaenys' ambition matched her blood, yet the risk was monumental. To proclaim herself a living Targaryen was to risk every sellsword and bounty hunter in the world coming after her head. Nonetheless, Rhaenys' resolve only hardened. She took a new name in Braavos. Nira Sand, a common sellsword working in the city's underbelly. She learned to blend into crowds and pass unnoticed, even while carrying a thin sword at her hip. She traveled to Pentos, discreetly establishing contact with those who might offer funding or arms. A few men pledged loyalty in half-whispers, especially when she provided them a glimpse of the heritage braided into her hair and her fierce Martell eyes. Some demanded proof. She offered them the scar on her ankle, a faint burn mark from a childhood accident in the Red Keep that a few remembered hearing about. She spoke of details only a princess in King's Landing would know. The arrangement of the gardens, the tapestries and Maegor's holdfast. It was enough to convince a small handful. Not many, but enough to begin. Through these clandestine visits, Rhaenys learned that her aunt, Daenerys, had married Khal Drogo of the Dothraki. Viserys was dead, slain by Drogo in a twisted turn of fate. Daenerys had, incredibly, hatched 3 dragons from ancient eggs, proving herself the mother of dragons. The news stole Rhaenys' breath. Dragons. Real dragons once again soared across the skies of Essos. That meant Targaryen power was stirring. Yet Daenerys was half a world away, forging her own destiny in the Dothraki Sea. If Rhaenys wanted to claim the throne, would it mean contesting her aunt? Or should she ally with Daenerys? The possibilities, the tensions, the uncertainties, each detail weighed on her. For the moment, Rhaenys chose to focus on her own path. She needed Dorne. She needed the support of her mother's people, for the Martells still seethed at the murder of Elia. The promise of her living daughter might galvanize them to vengeance. But would they risk open war against King Robert and the Lannisters? Rhaenys suspected Doran Martell might hesitate. He had always been known for caution, for playing the long game. Quentyn Martell and Trystane Martell were his heirs, while Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper, was known for his ferocity. But Oberyn had perished fighting in King's Landing years ago. No, wait, that was not correct. Oberyn had died in a trial by combat, killed by the Mountain in a savage twist of fate. That was the man who had murdered Rhaenys' brother, Aegon, or so the stories claimed. Indeed, the debt of blood between House Martell and House Lannister was so profound that Rhaenys suspected they would seize any chance at vengeance. And so at last, she returned to Dorne in secret, landing under cover of darkness at an obscure port near the southern coast. Ellaria accompanied her still, older now, more cautious, yet unwavering in her duty. They rode for Sunspear disguised as travelers, their faces hidden beneath desert scarves. The winding roads tested them, but eventually, the towers of Sunspear rose from the horizon, their pale stones shimmering in the midday sun. Rhaenys' stomach roiled with anticipation. Here, in the seat of House Martell, her claim would be tested. They secured an audience with Prince Doran, under conditions of strict secrecy. Late one evening, after the torches were lit and the corridors of the palace quieted, Rhaenys was brought to Doran's solar. She entered with trembling hands. She had met him once before as a child, though she could not recall his face. Now, she saw a stoic man in his 50s, bound to a wheeled chair, his body crippled by gout. His face was long, his expression calm, his eyes revealing a hint of sorrow and repressed fury. Ellaria bowed to him, then retreated, leaving Rhaenys alone in front of her mother's brother. For a moment, Dorne studied her in silence. She stood before him, uncertain what to say. She had expected the usual questions. How can you prove your identity? What do you want from me? But instead Dorne spoke softly. My dear girl, your mother's eyes. His voice broke, just a tremor, as he gazed at the princess who had been thought dead these many years. I never dared hope I would see them again. Rhaenys felt tears threaten at the corners of her eyes. She knelt, pressed her forehead to the cool floor. My lord, she whispered, hardly trusting herself to speak. I have come home. In that quiet solar, the pair exchanged truths withheld for years. Dorne admitted he had known of her survival only in fragments, never truly certain if the rumors were real, or if it was merely wishful thinking. Ellaria was once tasked to guard her, but communications had been sporadic. Rhaenys, for her part, recounted the meager details of her upbringing, her training, her fleeting knowledge of Westerosi politics, gleaned from travelers in Braavos and Pentos. She confessed her intent. She wanted to claim the Iron Throne, or at least stand forth and declare her right, dethroning the usurpers who had murdered her kin. She wanted justice. Dorne listened, eyes hooded. At length he said, It is a risky move. Robert Baratheon's hold on the throne has never been wholeheartedly stable, but many great lords are loyal, or at least content to let sleeping dragons lie. The Lannisters command wealth and armies. Stannis Baratheon and Renly Baratheon, each, have their own claims. Even the Tyrells may not support a Targaryen so easily. Rhaenys' heart pounded. She had known these obstacles existed, but hearing them enumerated by a man as careful as Dorne was daunting. I understand, my lord. He tilted his head. Do you also understand that your Aunt Daenerys has 3 dragons at her command? That is not a trifling matter. Many in the 7 kingdoms have heard rumors of a Targaryen queen across the sea, and it sets their hearts aflutter with fear and wonder. If you march on King's Landing, will it be as an ally to Daenerys, or an adversary? Rhaenys swallowed. I do not wish to fight her. She's Targaryen, as am I. But I am Rhaegar's daughter. The throne was my father's to claim. I do not know if she believes she is the rightful heir, or if she would step aside for me. Dorne smiled faintly. You speak of justice, but the Iron Throne is not about justice, child. It is about power. Daenerys might see your claim as a challenge. She might see it as a boon. One cannot say. For now, let us focus on what we can do here in Dorne. In me, you have an ally who wants to avenge Elia. You have my heartfelt blessing, and all the quiet support I can muster. But I cannot fling open my gates and cry your name from the ramparts, or we risk the Lannisters descending upon us before you are ready. We must be cunning, patient. And so it began. Rhaenys spent months in Sunspear under careful secrecy, forging alliances with the Sand Snakes, the daughters of Oberyn Martell, and with lords in the region who still loathed the Lannisters. She discovered that her mother's memory was revered by the Dornish. Where the rest of Westeros might have forgotten Elia, Dorne had not. They saw in Rhaenys the face of their lost princess, and many pledged their devotion quietly, waiting for the day she would reveal herself. Little by little, Dorne mobilized funds, gleaned intelligence, and arranged small but strategic marriages or pacts that would strengthen Rhaenys' standing. The tension in Westeros had escalated, she learned, as the years had passed. Robert Baratheon was rumored to be drowning in wine and debt. His queen, Cersei Lannister, maneuvered behind the scenes, rumored to share an unspeakable closeness with her twin brother Jaime. Their son Joffrey, golden-haired, was widely disliked for his cruelty. The realm had begun to fracture around the edges. Houses Stark, Tully, and Arryn had grown wary of King's Landing. The seeds of rebellion smoldered. Rhaenys realized there was no better time to strike. Then news came that Robert Baratheon had died under suspicious circumstances. Some said a boar, others whispered poison. Joffrey was crowned king, a boy with a sadistic streak that made the realm tremble. The War of the Five Kings erupted like wildfire. Renly Baratheon claimed the throne, as did Stannis Baratheon. Robb Stark was named king in the north, though he did not claim the Iron Throne, only independence. The Riverlands and the Westerlands were ablaze, armies clashing in every field. In the midst of this chaos, Dorne watched, waiting for the right moment. And Rhaenys Targaryen prepared to reveal herself. She was 18 now, radiant and fierce in the deep red garb of House Martell. A slim sword belt circled her waist, and her black hair fell to her shoulders in braided strands laced with ribbons of crimson. She wore a golden sunburst pendant that had once belonged to her mother, Elia Dotad. But around her finger, she wore a ring bearing the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen, a silent testament to her blood. A hush fell upon the courtyard of Sunspear as she stepped forward, flanked by Prince Doran and Ilaria, to address a gathering of Dornish lords and ladies who had been carefully convened. The twilight sky bled into dusk overhead, casting a darkening glow over them. "I stand before you," Rhaenys said, voice trembling with passion, "not merely as Rhaenys Sand, nor a nameless orphan, but as the daughter of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen and Princess Elia Martell. I was believed lost when King's Landing fell, but by the grace of the gods and the unwavering devotion of a few loyal souls, I survived. Today, I come forth to reclaim my birthright and to avenge the injustices done to my mother, my brother, and all of Dorne." Meorsai. A murmur rippled through the assembled lords. Some had not known what to expect. Some doubted still. But Doran Martell wheeled forward, tears glistening in his eyes. "Lords of Dorne," he said, voice resonating with quiet authority, "this is my sister's child, the rightful princess. Our house has suffered too long under the Lannisters' heel. Now is the time for Dorne to rise. For my brother Oberyn, for my sister Elia, for Aegon, and for all who fell beneath Lannister treachery. Will you stand with us?" Mekoran. The roar that erupted was unlike any Rhaenys had heard. Swords were raised, fists clenched, voices crying her name. "For Elia," they shouted. "For Dorne, for Princess Rhaenys." The fervor quickened her pulse and set her blood aflame. She felt the weight of destiny upon her, terrifying and exhilarating at once. She looked over at Ilaria, who nodded in silent pride, and at Doran, whose cunning eyes sparkled with vindication. They had done it. They had kindled the spark. Now, they would set the realm ablaze. Within days, ravens flew from Sunspear, bearing secret messages to potential allies across the Seven Kingdoms. The Tyrells had once been leery of the Lannisters. They might be persuaded to break their uneasy alliance with King Joffrey. The Stormlands, too, were divided between Stannis and the memory of Renly. Word also reached distant corners of the realm that a Targaryen princess had arisen in Dorne, the daughter of Rhaegar, rightful heir to the Iron Throne. Rumors spread like wildfire. The Targaryen cause no longer rested solely on the shoulders of Daenerys across the sea. Now there was another, born of Westerosi soil, backed by Dorne's armies. Many lords who despised the Lannisters were intrigued. Yet the North and the Riverlands were already embroiled in war. Robb Stark fought to avenge his father, Ned Stark, who had been executed by King Joffrey. The realm was in utter chaos, the roads unsafe, the small folk terrified. Rhaenys' forces mustered in Dorne. She had perhaps 15,000 spears, men hardened by the desert sun, sworn to house Martell and its banner houses. Not a vast host, compared to the combined might of the Lannisters and their allies, but respectable enough to carve a path northward, if timed well. And so, the Dornish army marched. They crossed the Red Mountains and pressed into the Reach, forging a discreet alliance with Mace Tyrell, who had grown disillusioned with King Joffrey's leadership. The Tyrell lords were flattered by the notion that Rhaenys would honor the old tradition of Targaryen alliances with the great houses of the south. Some even whispered that Rhaenys might wed a Tyrell scion to cement the pact. though no formal betrothal was announced. For the moment, mutual interest in dethroning the Lannisters was enough to bind them together. As Rhaenys' host swelled with a portion of Tyrell soldiers, she received word that King Joffrey had died. A cup of wine at his wedding feast, ironically. Suspicions swirled. Poison administered by the Tyrells or the Martells, or perhaps someone else. The realm was thrown further into disarray with Tommen, Joffrey's younger brother, now crowned. This new boy king was rumored to be more pliable and gentler, though still overshadowed by his mother, Cersei. The Lannisters looked to regroup, but their position was precarious. War raged on multiple fronts. The north rose. Stannis lingered. The Dornish marched. It was during this time that Rhaenys sent an envoy to Dragonstone, hoping to contact Stannis Baratheon, who claimed the throne by right of Robert's lineage, but who had alienated most of the great houses with his zeal. She wrote a careful missive. "I am Rhaenys of House Targaryen, eldest daughter of Prince Rhaegar, rightful heir to the Iron Throne. I wish to spare the realm further bloodshed. Submit to me, acknowledge my claim, and I will grant you a place of honor. Resist, and the fires of war will only burn brighter." Stannis, prideful and unyielding, replied with a curt refusal, proclaiming her a pretender. So the possibility of cooperation there died, in a swirl of stubbornness and mutual distrust. And yet, not all was bleak. Many lords of the Crown Lands, weary of Lannister rule, began to open their gates to the Dornish host. The Tyrells pressed in from the southeast, while Rhaenys' spear-tipped columns advanced from Dorne along the Roserat. One balmy evening, Rhaenys gazed upon the horizon and saw the faint outline of King's Landing's walls in the distance. Those same walls she had last seen as a terrified child. Emotions roiled within her. Dread, anger, longing for vengeance. Rumors of her approach spread through the city like a contagion. Some welcomed the idea of a Targaryen restoration, though that was overshadowed by the memory of the Mad King's atrocities. Others dreaded a repeat of dragon fire. There were no actual dragons with Rhaenys, but people seldom let facts stand in the way of fear. Meanwhile, Tommen Baratheon, still so young, remained in the Red Keep, with Cersei whispering in his ear, while Jaime Lannister commanded the King's Guard. But the city's defenses were weakened by the drawn-out war. Starvation and unrest festered among the small folk. The Lannisters had paid heavily to keep their hold, and their coffers were draining. On a gray morning, Rhaenys stood atop a rise overlooking the Blackwater Rush, the waters glinting below. She donned armor forged in Dorne, light and flexible, etched with the Martell spear and the Targaryen dragon entwined. At her side, Illyria wore lighter garb, a steel-tipped spear in hand, her face grim. The great host of Dorne and the Reach stretched behind them, banners flapping. In the distance, the city's gates were shut, but few loyal defenders manned the walls. The scars of previous battles and sieges marred the fortifications. Perhaps the Lannisters hoped for an honorable parley or sought time to rally. Rhaenys would give them neither. She ordered her captains to prepare for an assault if the gates were not opened by sundown. But before the horns could sound, a party rode out under a white flag of truce. At its head was Tyrion Lannister, the dwarf known as the Imp, once rumored to be a hand of the king. He approached carefully, alone, while the rest of the party hung back. Rhaenys rode forth, meeting him between the lines. She regarded him suspiciously. He was, after all, a Lannister. But she knew of his reputation for cleverness and fairness, at least compared to the rest of his family. "Princess Rhaenys, is it?" Tyrion said, inclining his head. His mismatched eyes gleamed with curiosity. "I must say, it's not every day one meets a dead girl riding at the head of an army." Her lips curved wryly. "I have risen, Lord Tyrion. Or do you deny my claim?" "Deny it? Why would I? I've witnessed enough improbable events to know there is truth in many rumors. Word is that Prince Rhaegar's daughter was dark of hair, taking after her mother. Looking at you, I can believe it. Then perhaps you can also believe I have not come all this way for idle chatter. Will your family surrender the city?" Tyrion sighed. "My father is dead, my nephew as well. My sister is regent for King Tommen, who is just a boy. The city starves. The realm bleeds. I fear another sack will only compound the misery." Rhaenys stiffened at the mention of a sack. She remembered the horror stories of her mother's fate, her brother's death. "Then open the gates. Let Tommen lay down his crown, and no further blood will be spilled. I will spare those who yield." Tyrion gazed at the city walls, the tattered Lannister banners that drooped in the humid air. Then he turned back to her, expression grave. "There is much distrust of Targaryens in this city. They remember what your grandfather did." Darren. She clenched her jaw. "I am not my grandfather. I will not burn innocents. Have you not seen the men behind me? They are Dornish, Reachmen, and others who are tired of Lannister rule. The city has little choice." His face flickered with resignation. "Then I will do what I can to persuade my sister. She may rage, but she is no fool. She knows the city cannot hold against this host. If we yield, will you spare Tommen? He is but a child, undeserving of the crimes of his mother." Rhaenys paused. The memory of her brother Aegon, dashed against a wall by Lannister men, swelled in her mind. But Tommen truly was a boy, an unwitting pawn. She swallowed her hatred. "If Tommen yields the throne to me, I will allow him to live. He may go to the Citadel to become a maester, or remain at court as a ward, or join the faith, but he will not be executed." Tyrion nodded. "I will convey your terms. Wait until sundown." At sundown the gates opened. Lannister guards, haggard from hunger, stood aside as the Dornish spears marched in. The small folk watched, silent and wary from doorways. Rhaenys rode at the head, face set like stone. Around her, the city stank of sewage, rot, and fear, but she pressed on toward the Red Keep. Once inside, she dismounted and climbed the steps to the throne room. Her heart pounded with every step. The hall was dimly lit, torches guttering in their sconces. Soldiers from Dorne fanned out, ensuring no trap awaited. There, upon the Iron Throne, sat Tommen Baratheon, crowned with gold too large for his small head. Beside him stood Cersei Lannister, wearing a proud sneer despite the pallor of her face. Jaime Lannister remained behind them, hand on his sword hilt. Tyrion stood to the side, trying to mediate. A hush fell. Rhaenys stepped forward. She looked upon Tommen, who appeared so young, so frightened. She thought of her own childhood stolen away. With an exhale, she placed her hand on the hilt of her sword. "The city has fallen. Stand, Tommen Baratheon. Will you yield your crown to the rightful queen?" Cersei hissed, "My son is the rightful." But Tommen's voice, shaky but clear, interrupted her. "I yield," he said, eyes brimming with tears. His hands trembled as he lifted the crown from his head. Cersei's face twisted in fury, but she could do nothing against an entire army. Slowly, Tommen stood, stepped down the dais, and held the crown out to Rhaenys. In that moment, she felt an overwhelming surge of conflicting emotions. Anger at the Lannisters, pity for the boy, triumph at her success, and the raw ache of remembering the child she had been when her father's kingdom was stolen. She accepted the crown and handed it to Alleria behind her. Then, with measured steps, she ascended the dais and turned to face the throne. Forged of 1,000 swords, the chair glinted menacingly in the torchlight. A memory flared in her mind of the stories her father would tell, how a Targaryen king had hammered those swords, together with dragonfire. Once a symbol of unity, now a symbol of endless strife. She turned back to the hall, where Cersei Lannister's furious green eyes bored into her. Where Tyrion stood with a neutral expression, though tension was etched in his posture. Where Jaime lingered, uncertain, that famed golden hand glinting. The Dornish soldiers lined the sides, spears upright. Tyrell banners hung behind them. And in the hush, Rhaenys lowered herself onto the Iron Throne. A prick of metal bit into her shoulder, drawing a bead of blood. She hissed at the sting but remained seated. So this was the cost of rule, the throne that cuts those who are not careful. She felt no elation, only the heavy weight of responsibility and sorrow for the blood spilled to reach this moment. Then her voice rang out in the gloom. "I am Rhaenys of the House Targaryen, first of my name, daughter of Prince Rhaegar and Princess Elia of Dorne, rightful queen of the Andals and the Rhoynar, and the first men, Lady of the Seven Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm. Let all present bear witness." Silence reigned. Gradually, those assembled knelt. Even Cersei, with a grimace of humiliation, sank to one knee, though her hatred burned bright as wildfire in her eyes. Tommen, weeping, did the same. Jaime bowed his head. Tyrion bowed as well, though his expression remained guarded. Illyria, tears shining, knelt at the front, along with Prince Doran, who had been carried in to witness this historic moment. The swirl of cloaks and the clink of mail filled the air as the new queen's subjects acknowledged her authority. Rhaenys fought the urge to weep. For her mother, for her brother, for her father, for all that had been lost. She pressed her trembling hands to the cold metal arms of the throne and thought, "This is only the beginning." Word of her ascension spread through the realm at breakneck speed. The War of the Five Kings had exhausted many houses. Now a Targaryen queen sat on the throne, though whether she could unify the land was uncertain. Dorne stood firmly behind her. The Reach was inclined to follow, given that she had partnered with them to oust the Lannisters. The Stormlands were in flux, as Stannis raged on Dragonstone, refusing to acknowledge her claim. The North had named Robb Stark king in the North, yet that conflict was tempered by Robb's distrust of the Lannisters, and rumor had it that the Red Wedding had shattered the Stark cause. The Riverlands were a battlefield strewn with corpses, uncertain of which king to follow. The Vale remained aloof, under the guardianship of Petyr Baelish, a cunning man with shifting loyalties. For Rhaenys, securing the throne meant more than capturing King's Landing. It meant forging alliances, quelling rebellions, and tending to a realm bled dry by war. Yet as she surveyed the Red Keep in the aftermath of her victory, her keenest worry lay elsewhere. Daenerys Targaryen. She had heard scattered reports that Daenerys marched with an unsullied army, that she had freed slaves in Astapor, Yunkai, and Marianne, and commanded 3 growing dragons. Eventually, her aunt was sure to turn her gaze westward, to the Seven Kingdoms. Would Daenerys see Rhaenys' coronation as a welcome sign of Targaryen resurgence, or an obstacle to her own ambitions? Rhaenys had no illusions that Daenerys would simply bend the knee. Dragons do not bow easily. In the days that followed her coronation, Rhaenys worked tirelessly. She restructured the small council, dismissing Cersei and those loyal to the Lannisters. She placed Tyrion Lannister as her master of coin, partly because she admired his intellect, and partly to keep a watchful eye on him. Doran Martell. She named her Hand of the Queen. Margaery Tyrell, betrothed to King Tommen before, was now a prominent figure at court, although Rhaenys had yet to name who she might wed to secure the Tyrell alliance. She also needed a new Kingsguard, or Queensguard, as she renamed it. Jaime Lannister was asked to lay down his white cloak, for she did not trust him to guard her life after all that had passed. He complied with weary resignation, suspecting he might not live long otherwise. Others were chosen from among the finest knights in Dorne and the Reach, men who had proven their loyalty. Under their watch, Rhaenys explored the Red Keep's halls, reacquainting herself with the place she had left as a small child. She found the old nursery where she and Aegon once played. A wave of grief struck her, and she wept quietly in the darkness. She also discovered the Royal Crypt, a somber labyrinth where the remains of Targaryen kings and princes lay. There, in a quiet alcove, she saw her father's effigy, carved in marble, placed there by those who wished to honor his memory. Rhaenys sank to her knees before it, tears wetting her cheeks. "Father," she whispered, "I have returned. I hope I make you proud." In that silent place, she felt a presence, or perhaps just the echo of her own heart, urging her onward. But old grudges would not rest. Even as she tried to impose order, rebel forces sprang up. Some men called her a pretender. Some rose in the name of Tommen, though the boy was now a ward of Rhaenys' court, kept in gentle captivity. A shadow loomed in the north, where rumors of White Walkers gained traction, although few in the south believed such tales. Rhaenys did not know what to make of these ominous reports, but she was not foolish enough to dismiss them outright. War had taught her that anything was possible. Stannis still clung to Dragonstone, fueled by the counsel of a Red Priestess. He declared Rhaenys and Daenerys both usurpers. Rhaenys' armies prepared to besiege Dragonstone, but the fortress was formidable. Meanwhile, the Ironborn rampaged in the west under the banners of House Greyjoy. The realm was fractured, battered, desperate for stability. Yet day by day, with Doran Martell's guidance and the steadfast loyalty of Dorne and much of the Reach, Rhaenys consolidated power. She eased the heavy taxes, replenished the city's grain stores, and sought to repair the ruin inflicted upon King's Landing. Small folk slowly warmed to her, appreciating the fewer tongues of wildfire scorching their streets, the lesser cruelty compared to Joffrey's short rule. She had a just streak in her, perhaps inherited from her mother, but tempered by the boldness of her father's line. She also received envoys from the free cities, who recognized her as the reigning Targaryen in Westeros, for the moment at least. But rumors of Daenerys' approach persisted, for the silver-haired queen was said to have conquered Meereen and built a massive following of freedmen. The question was, would Daenerys cross the narrow sea with her dragons? And if so, when? It came, inevitably. A raven from the east. The letter bore the seal of a dragon and arrived in the dead of night. Rhaenys opened it in private, her hands tense around the parchment. The handwriting was elegant yet forceful. It read, "To Rhaenys Targaryen, who names herself Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, from Daenerys Stormborn of the House Targaryen, Queen of Meereen, Breaker of Chains, and Mother of Dragons. I have learned of your claim and your ascension to the Iron Throne. I rejoice that the blood of the dragon persists in Westeros. Yet we must speak, for it is my intention to return to the land of my birth and claim the throne that was usurped from my family. You name yourself rightful queen. I too am rightful queen by blood and fire. Let us meet in Parley, so we may determine the fate of the Targaryen line. I propose a gathering on neutral ground, to prevent the realm from being torn once more by war. We share the same dream, a united Westeros. But only one of us can truly wear the crown. Will you receive me, or shall we be enemies?" Ah. Rhaenys read the letter twice, heart pounding. She had expected confrontation, but a part of her hoped Daenerys might be content to rule in Essos, or share the rule somehow. Yet Daenerys spoke of only one queen. A sinking feeling tightened in Rhaenys' chest. If they came to blows, if dragons were unleashed against her armies, the realm would bleed anew. She summoned Doran, Tyrion, and her closest advisors. They debated late into the night. Doran urged caution. Tyrion observed that Daenerys possessed dragons, something that could devastate armies. Others suggested sending assassins to dispatch Daenerys before she landed. Rhaenys rejected that notion. She was no butcher of her own blood. The debate ran in circles until dawn's light peeked through the windows. Ultimately, Rhaenys chose to respond in kind, extending an invitation to Parley. She suggested they meet on Dragonstone, a halfway point between her seat in King's Landing and Daenerys' position across the sea. The letter concluded, "I wish to avoid the destruction of our realm. We are family. Let us discuss how best to restore House Targaryen's rightful rule." She sealed the parchment with wax and dispatched the raven. Weeks passed in uneasy anticipation. Forces were repositioned in case Daenerys tried a sudden landing. But the young queen arrived as promised, approaching Dragonstone with a fleet of ships bearing the three-headed dragon banner. Rhaenys sailed out in her own vessel, accompanied by a small retinue that included Illyria, Tyrion, and a handful of Queen's Guard. They anchored in the lee of Dragonstone's volcanic cliffs, their hearts pounding as they caught sight of dragons circling overhead. The creatures were monstrous to behold, with wings that spanned the length of a galley. Their roars shook the air. Rhaenys had never seen dragons, only read about them in dusty tomes. A mixture of awe and fear coursed through her. She disembarked on the black sands of Dragonstone's shore. The sulfuric smell of the volcanic rock clung to the air. Daenerys Targaryen awaited her, flanked by her own retinue, Grey Worm of the unsullied Missandei of Denye, and others who seemed equally exotic. The dragons soared above, occasionally swooping low with thunderous flaps. Rhaenys and Daenerys regarded each other across a few paces, measuring and wary. They shared the same blood, though their features differed. Daenerys was pale-haired, violet-eyed, a vision of Valyrian beauty. Rhaenys was dark-haired, inheriting the Dornish hue, though with the same Targaryen burn in her gaze. They stepped forward and bowed, each acknowledging the other's majesty. It felt surreal. Daenerys spoke first, voice resonant with quiet power. I have waited my whole life to reclaim Westeros from those who stole my birthright, yet here I find it already reclaimed, by you. Her gaze flicked over Rhaenys' garb, the Targaryen sigil on her surcoat. I must confess, I felt joy when I heard you lived. I was a child when we fled. Viserys always insisted we were the last. Rhaenys dipped her head. I only learned of your existence when I was older. For years, I believed we had no other kin. I am pleased we share the same ambition, to see House Targaryen restored. I have done what I could to unify the realm. Yet I know you have come to claim the throne yourself. So I propose we find a compromise. Daenerys' eyes tightened. And what compromise do you envision? 2 queens ruling as one. History warns us that divided rule leads to conflict. The dragons have 3 heads, I know, but for monarchy 1 is enough. Rhaenys struggled to keep her composure. If we battle, the realm will suffer. You have dragons. I have half the kingdom's support, perhaps more, after the Lannisters' downfall. Another war would cost thousands of lives. We are family, Daenerys. Could we not rule together as equals? Or at least find a marriage alliance that would bind our claims? I have no living brother to offer, nor do you, but perhaps there is a way. If we truly want the good of the realm, we must avoid war. Daenerys turned her gaze skyward, watching her largest dragon circle overhead. I do not want unnecessary bloodshed, she said at last. Yet I have a destiny that has guided me across the sea. Fire and blood. I will not be second to anyone, not even you, my dear niece. Then her call. A flash of anger rose in Rhaenys. I am the daughter of Rhaegar, the rightful heir after my father. That is my birthright. Must we refight the wars of the past, repeating the cycle? Daenerys' expression softened slightly. It seems we are at an impasse. Still, let us speak further. Maybe in time we can find a path that does not end in dragonfire. She gestured up the steep path toward the fortress. Come, let us talk inside. Inside Dragonstone's great hall, they spoke for hours, each pressing her claim, each calling upon House Targaryen's legacy. Daenerys recounted her trials in Essos, freeing slaves, earning the devotion of thousands. Rhaenys spoke of her harsh exile in Dorne and Braavos, her triumphant reclamation of the throne. By nightfall, no clear resolution had emerged. They agreed to refrain from hostilities for the time being, acknowledging the threat in the north. The rumors of White Walkers had reached Daenerys' ears too. She was intrigued, though skeptical. But before they parted, Daenerys turned to Rhaenys. We are the blood of the dragon. Our people look to us for deliverance or destruction. Let us hope we choose wisely. Rhaenys nodded, her heart heavy. She could sense the tension beneath their civility. A single spark could ignite war between them. Yet she told herself that a peaceful settlement was possible. There must be a way to share the throne, or to come to some arrangement that recognized both of their positions. She prayed it would be so, for the sake of the realm. Returning to King's Landing, Rhaenys threw herself into the task of governing. The city showed signs of recovery under her rule. Markets reopened, petty crime lessened, and the small folk began to whisper that Queen Rhaenys was fair, albeit stern. She enforced justice diligently, punishing looters and corrupt officials with an even hand. The presence of the Dornish guard in the city unsettled some, but it kept order. The Lannister remnants were stripped of their influence, though Tyrion remained in a precarious position, doing his best to salvage his house's standing by serving as Rhaenys' master of coin. Cersei Lannister had been sent to the Great Septi, effectively cloistered for her role in the past crimes of her family, while her son Tommen remained under watch, treated kindly but lacking any real power. Yet, even as she tried to mend the kingdom, Rhaenys knew a reckoning with Daenerys loomed. The letters exchanged between them were cordial yet tense, each side positioning for advantage. Daenerys had established a foothold at Dragonstone, then reached out to lords in the Vale, the Riverlands, even the north. To Rhaenys' frustration, many houses rode back with interest, impressed by tales of living dragons. Meanwhile, Rhaenys' advisors pressed her to ready for war, but she hesitated. She could not stomach slaughtering another Targaryen, nor did she relish the prospect of her own armies being bathed in dragonfire. Winter crept closer. Chilling winds blew in from the north, carrying with them ever darker rumors of the undead beyond the wall. The Night's Watch sent ravens begging for aid, describing whites and white walkers. Most southern lords scoffed, too busy with their own ambitions to heed the tales. But Rhaenys, remembering the destructive folly of ignoring threats, listened carefully. She learned that Jon Snow, the new king in the north after Robb Stark's fall, had met with Daenerys, seeking her help against the coming darkness. That meant Daenerys might shift her focus from King's Landing to the north, forging an alliance that Rhaenys had not foreseen. And so a new question arose. Should Rhaenys send aid to the north as well? She called her council. Dorne, stoic but thoughtful, recommended focusing on consolidating the south first. Tyrion argued that ignoring the northern threat could prove disastrous if the rumors were true. Illyria, her eyes haunted by memories of the war, urged caution in trusting the word of men from the north. But Rhaenys felt a stirring of conscience. If the rumors were true, an army of the dead threatened all life. She had a duty to protect her realm. Perhaps this was an opportunity to build bridges with Daenerys and the north, to unite them all under one cause. Yet her advisors warned her that if she marched north and left King's Landing vulnerable, Daenerys might seize the capital. In the end, Rhaenys decided to take a risk. She dispatched a contingent of Dornish and Reach forces to march north, carrying supplies and dragon glass recently mined from Dragonstone by arrangement with Daenerys. She stayed in King's Landing, trusting Dorne to oversee the muster, while sending a message to Jon Snow. I, Rhaenys Targaryen, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, extend my hand in alliance against the threat you face. May the gods preserve us all if your warnings prove true. It was the boldest gesture she could offer without abandoning her seat of power. In parallel, she wrote to Daenerys, urging them to set aside their dispute for the time being and unite against the White Walkers. If Daenerys agreed, perhaps they could stave off disaster. If she refused, then the realm was doomed to fight two wars at once, one against the dead, one against itself. Weeks passed with no definitive answer. The northern chill crept further south. Tension simmered. Then at last a raven arrived from Winterfell, bearing Jon Snow's thanks and a plea for more help. Daenerys had flown north with her dragons, he wrote, to hold the wall. The battles there were fierce, beyond imagining. The living needed every ally. Rhaenys shivered, reading those words. If Daenerys was already in the thick of it, risking her dragons to battle the undead, then perhaps she had found a higher calling than mere conquest. Muster horns sounded in King's Landing as Rhaenys assembled a larger force, determined to join the fight. She could no longer stand idle. She left a token garrison to secure the capital, relying on the Tyrell alliance. Dorne remained behind, too ill to journey, but Illyria led a vanguard of Dornish cavalry. Tyrion accompanied them in an advisory role, though he had no love for cold climates. Together, they marched north. As they passed the Neck, the air grew colder. By the time they reached the lands beyond Moat Cailin, snow fell in sweeping drifts, and breath misted in clouds. Many Dornish men grumbled at the freezing weather, but they continued on, fueled by a grim sense of purpose. They reached Winterfell to find the ancient castle bustling with activity, preparing for a final stand against the undead hordes. Jon Snow greeted them with relief. Daenerys herself stood upon the battlements, silver hair stark against the snow. Dragons perched in the courtyard. Rhaenys approached, heart pounding. So much had led them here, to this frigid place, under the looming shadow of an unimaginable threat. They stood face to face once more, the snow swirling around them, the hush of thousands of soldiers waiting. Daenerys spoke first, a tremor in her voice. "We welcome your aid, Queen Rhaenys. The dead come in numbers greater than we feared. My dragons have burned hundreds, but still they come. This is no mere rumor." Rhaenys nodded. "Then let us stand side by side, if only for this war. Our differences can wait. Life must prevail. House Targaryen must unite, or all falls to darkness." And a flicker of warmth lit Daenerys' eyes. "Agreed. Let us be sisters in arms, at least for this night." So it was. The armies of the living gathered, forging an uneasy alliance. The combined might of Dorne, the Reach, the remaining northern bannermen, the Vale, and the Unsullied braced themselves behind Winterfell's walls. Night fell, black and bitter. The White Walkers descended, an endless tide of whites filling the horizon, shrieking and moaning as they flung themselves at the ramparts. Rhaenys fought atop the battlements, sword in hand, side by side with Illyria. She had never seen such horror. The dead crawling over each other, unrelenting even when cut apart, driven by an icy malevolence. Screams filled the air. Torches blazed. Arrows whistled. And above it all, dragons roared, unleashing torrents of flame that lit the night sky with pillars of golden fire. Daenerys soared overhead on Drogon, raining destruction upon the undead horde. Another dragon, Rhaegal, circled nearby. But the dead had monstrous ice spears, hurled by the White Walkers with supernatural precision. At one point, Rhaenys looked up in terror as a spear narrowly missed Drogon. The dragon shrieked and wheeled away. The situation was dire. The living lines buckled under the weight of the dead. On and on they fought, sinking into a chaotic, desperate struggle. Rhaenys lost track of time, her arm burning with fatigue, the clang of steel and the shrieks of the undead filling her ears. She glimpsed Daenerys on foot at one moment, blasted from Drogon's back, but still swinging a sword, screaming orders to the Unsullied. Then came the moment when the Night King himself, mounted on an undead worm, descended upon Winterfell. A wave of darkness spread across the battlefield, freezing men in their tracks. Rhaenys' heart hammered as she realized the White Walkers' leader sought to snuff out the living in one decisive stroke. She rallied her men, pressing forward, trying to reach Daenerys. And in that chaos, she caught sight of Jon Snow engaged in a fierce duel with the Night King. Valyrian steel against an ice spear. The Night King was winning. Rhaenys tried to intervene, but the press of whites closed in around her, claws raking, jaws snapping. She cut them down, panting, but more came. All seemed lost until Daenerys' dragon flame struck the Night King from above, momentarily driving him to his knees. Jon Snow zeiced the opening and plunged Longclaw through the Night King's chest in a flurry of desperate strikes. A terrible shriek echoed across the battlefield as the White Walker collapsed into shards of ice, dissolving into nothing. All around, the whites froze, then crumbled, their unholy magic undone. The silence that followed was deafening. The living stood panting, battered, soaked in blood and sweat, ringed by heaps of melting corpses. They had won, but at a horrific cost. Thousands lay dead, including many noble lords and stalwart warriors. Winterfell's walls were scorched, half collapsed in places. Snow drifted over the carnage in a quiet hush, as if the gods themselves wept for the fallen. In that eerie aftermath, Rhaenys found Daenerys, huddled against a fallen rampart. The silver-haired queen's face was streaked with soot and tears. Her dragon circled overhead, keening. Rhaenys knelt beside her, pressing a hand to Daenerys' shoulder. In that moment, there was no talk of crowns, no rivalry. Only relief and sorrow intertwined. Daenerys managed a faint smile through her exhaustion. "We did it," she rasped. "We defeated death itself." Rhaenys bowed her head. "Together," she said, "House Targaryen stands." Days later, when the fires were quenched and the bodies burned, the survivors gathered in Winterfell's great hall for an uneasy feast. The mood was subdued, overshadowed by mourning for the dead. Yet, there was also a quiet sense of triumph, for they had averted the end of the world. At the high table, Rhaenys and Daenerys sat side by side, occasionally exchanging soft words. They both knew that, with the existential threat gone, the question of succession would arise once more. Would they return south and wage war for the throne they both believed was theirs? Or had the crucible of the long night changed them? Jon Snow approached them, bowing respectfully. "My queens," he said, "the North is indebted to you for your valor. We are free from the darkness, but the realm lies in ruin. I beg you to spare the people further conflict. If there must be one queen, then find a path to unity that does not spill more blood." Rhaenys shared a long look with Daenerys. The memory of the war, of the undead horrors, seemed to echo in both their minds. Slowly Daenerys spoke, voice trembling with empathy. "I have seen enough death. I thought I must rule the 7 kingdoms alone. But we stand at a turning point. Perhaps there is another way." Rhaenys nodded, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "Let us not repeat the sins of the past," she murmured. "I will cede the crown if it means peace. I never wanted to be queen merely for the sake of power. I wanted justice for my mother, my brother, and for the realm. If we can ensure a fair rule—" Daenerys took her hand. "Then we shall do it together," she said quietly. "We can forge a new tradition, 2 queens, a united house Targaryen. Or we might find a way to share the burden. I see now that the realm needs more than one set of shoulders to bear the weight." A hush fell among those gathered around. Jon exhaled in relief. Others looked on in surprise or skepticism. But that night, in the battered halls of Winterfell, the seeds of a new era were planted. Rhaenys and Daenerys would return south to oversee the reconstruction of the realm. In time, they would address the question of how to share power, how to incorporate the North, how to ensure a lasting peace. It would not be simple. Nobles would protest, old grudges would resurface, and the question of heirs and succession would haunt them. Yet they had learned that unity could defeat even the greatest darkness. And so they made a pact, sealed not by conquest, but by mutual understanding and the burdens of survival. Thus began the reign of Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who returned from death, and Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, each holding half the weight of a crown too heavy for one. The realm, war-torn and weary, struggled to heal under their joint rule, forging alliances that might once have been unthinkable, seeking a more equitable future for all. In the annals of history, the bards would sing of that improbable alliance, of how 2 Targaryen queens averted the long night and spared Westeros another cycle of devastating war. They would sing, too, of the black-haired princess whose life was saved at the edge of a blade in the Red Keep, only to return years later, strong and unbroken, to claim the destiny stolen from her family. In that destiny, shaped by both fire and blood, Rhaenys found a purpose greater than vengeance. She realized that true rule lay not in the seat of the Iron Throne, but in the care for those who lived beneath it. She would never forget the terror of being a helpless child in a city overrun by violence. That memory guided her hand in governance, compelling her toward mercy rather than cruelty, compassion rather than tyranny. Daenerys, too, tempered her fierceness with the memory of her own trials in Essos, how she had fought for the downtrodden. Together, they sought to rewrite the future of House Targaryen, forging a new legacy founded on unity, rather than a single iron fist. Even so, the Iron Throne still stood in the Red Keep, a perilous seat that cut those deemed unworthy. It served as a reminder that power was a fickle thing, a sword that could protect or destroy. In the years to come, Rhaenys and Daenerys would face fresh challenges, from discontented lords to the complexities of inheritance. Yet when winter ended and spring broke across the land, blossoms grew where battlefields once lay, and children played in cobbled streets once drowned by war. In those small, fragile signs of hope, Rhaenys glimpsed the shape of a realm reborn. And so the story began anew, a story of 2 Targaryens bound by blood and tested by ice, forging a realm that might at last know peace. For as long as the line of the dragon endures, there will be tales of fire and tears, of heartbreak and redemption, and of how a young princess named Rhaenys once rose from the ashes to help mend a broken world. The sun broke over a dawn so clear and bright that it seemed to wash the entire expanse of sky in a palette of gold. A stiff wind carried the last vestiges of winter away from Winterfell's ramparts, along with the bitter tang of burnt flesh that still haunted the courtyard. Smoke from the pyres had thinned overnight, and in the hush of morning, one could almost imagine that the devastation of the battle had been some awful nightmare, banished with the light. Yet the scars remained, both in the shattered stones of the castle walls and in the hollow-eyed survivors who stirred within. Rhaenys Targaryen stood atop Winterfell's highest battlements, gazing out over a landscape covered in a thin crust of snow. She wore a thick fur cloak of grayish-brown, its heft unfamiliar against her shoulders, accustomed as she was to the lighter garments of the south. Beneath that cloak lay the remnants of her battle gear, leathers and mail hammered in Dorne, battered and streaked with bloodstains. Only a day had passed since the final clash against the dead. She had barely slept, for her mind raced with the memory of how close they had come to utter annihilation. In the courtyard below, columns of men and women continued to sort through the wreckage and carry away the bodies for burning. Stench of char and decay clung to the cold air. Now and again, a figure would collapse from exhaustion or from the weight of grief. Yet, there was also a palpable relief, a sense that they had accomplished the impossible. The Night King was gone, the White Walkers destroyed. Westeros still lived, and that knowledge sparked a tiny ember of hope within Rhaenys' heart, even as she struggled to accept all that had been lost. Her breath plumed in white clouds before her face. She lifted her gaze to the horizon, recalling the final moments of the battle. She saw again the Night King's towering silhouette, the swirl of unnatural darkness around him, the whites surging like a tide of hungry shadows. She remembered her own desperate fury, cutting them down with numb arms until she could hardly lift her blade. Then Daenerys' dragonfire had blazed across the courtyard, driving back the infinite gloom. Jon Snow struck the final blow, and the Night King dissolved into shards of ice. All around, the whites collapsed into limp husks. Then came the hush, like a sudden emptiness in the air as the enemy fell away. Rhaenys had nearly fainted on the spot, weak with a mixture of relief and disbelief. She was not alone on the battlements. Ellaria stood a short distance away, leaning against the stones as she, too, surveyed the new dawn. A purple bruise darkened Ellaria's cheek, and her lower lip was split, but her posture carried its usual quiet pride. She offered a slight nod as Rhaenys glanced her way. "Your Grace," Ellaria said softly, "the cart with your morning meal has arrived. Will you eat?" Rhaenys exhaled. She still wasn't used to that title, Your Grace, especially on the lips of one who had known her as a child. But she managed a tired smile. "I suppose I must," she said. "The dead no longer have any need of food, while the living do." Ellaria's features twitched, perhaps in an attempt at a smile, but no real joy reached her eyes. There had been so much death. Another wave of sorrow threatened to pull Rhaenys under, so she forced her mind to practicalities. "Where's Daenerys?" "She has gone to speak with Jon Snow in the Great Hall," Ellaria replied, stepping closer. "They are planning the distribution of food stores. Supplies must be stretched, or we'll lose as many men to hunger and cold as we did to the battle itself." Rhaenys rubbed her temples. Winter was not so easily banished by a single victory. The weather might be improving in the south, but here, the chill could last far longer. "Then let us go to them. There is much to do." They descended from the battlements, their boots crunching on frost-touched stone steps. More of Rhaenys' men, her men and Daenerys' men, for at this point they were mingled beyond easy separation, waited in the yard. The battered banners of House Martell, House Tyrell, and House Targaryen drooped in the pallid light. More than a few recognized Rhaenys and dropped to a knee in greeting, though the gesture felt half-hearted from exhaustion. She acknowledged them with a nod, and pressed on into Winterfell's interior. The great hall was still half in disarray, benches upended, rushes scattered. Yet an effort was being made to restore order. A handful of servants from the local steads were clearing debris and sweeping out the caked mud and ash. The hearth fires crackled, offering welcome warmth. At the far end of the hall, Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen stood near a long trestle table strewn with maps, each murmuring quietly, while a few other advisors hovered close by. Daenerys looked more gaunt than usual, her silver hair pulled back tightly, face pale from fatigue. She wore a thick, black fur cloak that contrasted sharply with her hair and emphasized the lines of worry around her eyes. Jon Snow, for his part, had a bandaged arm, his face nearly ashen, but he managed to speak with steady determination. Near them stood Tyrion Lannister, his brow furrowed as he pointed at something on the map, and Sir Davos Seaworth, whose expression remained grim and reflective. Rhaenys approached, footsteps echoing on the stone floor. Daenerys glanced up at once, her eyes flickering with relief and warmth, though that warmth was quickly blanketed by the gravity of their tasks. Jon Snow gave Rhaenys a respectful bow of the head. Not long ago, the idea of a Targaryen queen would have filled him with wariness. Now they had fought side by side, and that seemed to change everything. "Your Grace," Jon said in a low voice, "I was just telling Queen Daenerys that, given our losses, we must be mindful of how we ration what little food we have left." Daenerys gestured at the scattering of parchments on the table. "We found stores in the castle cellars, more than we initially thought. But we've nearly doubled Winterfell's population with all these armies here. And the free folk from north of the wall are camped just beyond the grounds, lacking shelter. We'll need to send the bulk of our soldiers south as soon as they can march," said Tyrion. "Winterfell isn't built to house such numbers indefinitely, and the larders will run dry if we wait too long. Even with the threat of stray whites gone, we must attend to the living. They'll starve otherwise." Rhaenys let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I agree. Our men will suffer if they remain up here with scarce provisions, but many are wounded or too weak to travel immediately. Could we arrange for some to stay behind, perhaps at the Dreadfort or Last Hearth, or other keeps? They'd have to be restocked with supplies, but it would spread the burden." Jon Snow nodded. "The Karstarks and Glovers may be able to lend resources, though they've already given much. The Umbers at Last Hearth." He trailed off, the memory of the Umbers' fate fresh in his mind. "Their castle was overrun first. We'd need to see what remains." Daenerys reached out, placing her hand upon the map. She traced a finger along the old roads leading south. "If we can arrange supply wagons, grain, salted meats from White Harbor, armies can head back through the Neck, stopping at Moat Cailin if necessary. Once we're in the Riverlands, it will be easier to forage. Spring is coming there, but the journey is still perilous." She turned her gaze toward Rhaenys, a flicker of hesitance in her eyes. "We must also decide if we return together, or if one of us remains here to oversee the transition. The realm expects leadership, and there is still the question of how we share that leadership, now that the immediate threat is gone." Rhaenys' stomach twisted. This was the conversation they had been avoiding, or at least postponing. In the throes of war against the dead, their differences in inheritance and rulership had felt distant, overshadowed by survival. Now that the army of the dead lay in pieces, the living had to face the future. "We should discuss that in privacy," Rhaenys said, glancing at Tyrion, "Jon, Sir Davos, and the others. All of you are my trusted advisors, but it may be best if Daenerys and I speak alone first, to determine how we wish to present ourselves to the realm. After all, we do not want rumors of strife or confusion to spread." Jon met her eyes and dipped his head. "That is wise. We have too many wounded souls here who need hope, not more uncertainty." Daenerys inclined her head, though she looked slightly tense. "Then let us do so." They withdrew into one of the smaller side chambers, a cozy room with a hearth that flickered against old stone walls. The door closed behind them with a wooden thud, leaving them in private. For a moment, neither spoke. Rhaenys eased out of her cloak and draped it over a nearby chair. The chill still lingered in the chamber, so she moved closer to the fire, letting the warmth lick at her fingertips. Daenerys stood across from her, arms folded. In the soft glow of the flames, she appeared younger than before, the lines of exhaustion more prominent around her eyes. Rhaenys felt a pang of sympathy. The weight of command had aged them both in too few years. She remembered the stories of the Targaryens who had come before. Aegon the Conqueror with his sisters, forging a kingdom by dragonfire. Now, Centuries later, it seemed House Targaryen might unite again, this time forging something new from the ashes of war. But how? She cleared her throat. I meant what I said up on the battlements before the final charge. I do not wish to wage war against you, Daenerys. Nor do I crave absolute power. I took the throne in King's Landing to rid the realm of those who harmed my family and to try to rebuild what was broken. But now you stand before me, my father's sister, and you've done what no one else could, brought dragons back to life, freed thousands from slavery, led men and women who would otherwise be shackled to a fate not of their choosing. I cannot dismiss your claim. No. Daenerys' expression softened. I remember when I first dreamed of returning to Westeros. It was a land of legends in my imagination. Viserys raged about it. He wanted me to marry some warlord, to buy an army, to take the throne that was stolen. I was only a child. I barely knew what it meant to be Targaryen. Then he died, and everything changed. I forged my own path, discovered my own strength, and yet, all along, I believed I was the rightful queen. The last Targaryen. Rhaenys. Her eyes dropped to the floor for a moment. When I learned of you, that you had somehow survived, I felt betrayed by the lies I'd been told. But I also felt hope. We are blood, you and I, the only living heirs of an ancient line. She raised her gaze, determination brimming. But our people can only follow one monarch at a time, yes? The lords are used to a single seat on the Iron Throne. In Meereen, I ruled alone. It is difficult to imagine splitting that power in Westeros without fracturing the realm. Rhaenys let her fingertips rest on the mantle of the fireplace, the warmth radiating through her gloves. There are precedents of joint rule in other lands, some in the free cities, though tenuous. But you're right. Westeros has always been one monarchy. We could attempt to formalize a shared monarchy, but that might invite endless confusion among the lords, each picking which queen's favor to curry. She paused, searching Daenerys' face. Yet the realm is fragile right now. We have an opportunity to show a different path. Perhaps we create a new seat of power, or we rotate governance, or we sign a binding contract that delineates each queen's responsibilities and authority. It may be complicated, but in the wake of this war, the entire land is looking for a reason to trust again. Ben so. Daenerys moved forward, the ends of her hair glimmering like silver in the firelight. We must also think of succession. The Targaryen line endures through us, but we have no children. She paused, as though remembering a personal sorrow. My child with Khal Drogo was stillborn, sacrificed by dark magic. I have believed myself barren since that time, though. She hesitated. I wonder if that may have changed, now that magic has returned with the dragons. I do not know, but the realm will ask these questions. If we both rule, do we each marry, birth children? Would that create multiple lines of inheritance? Nah. Rhaenys nodded. And I have no husband, no paramour. I've never even... She broke off with a humorless chuckle, feeling a slight blush heat her cheeks. I grew up in secrecy, in terror, with no time for such concerns. Once I stepped forth to claim my birthright, war followed. I haven't paused to think about the future in that sense, but we must. At the very least, the lords will demand clarity. They won't want a new war of succession once we're gone. Ziane. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of burning logs. They locked eyes, a quiet understanding passing between them. They were both tired, both frightened of repeating the cycle of blood that had defined their house. Daenerys' lips parted, her voice coming softly. Perhaps the best solution is to unify the lines. If one of us were to marry and have a child, that child could become the single monarch upon our passing. But until then, we could govern together, each recognized as queen. Rhaenys considered it. That would require acceptance from the realm, but I believe it could be done if we gather enough alliances, especially if we show ourselves as peacemakers. Tyrion, Dorne Martell, the Tyrells, everyone would see the advantage. No house is eager for more war, and if you do have the possibility of bearing a child, That could solve the question of a single heir, though the realm might expect me to do the same, to ensure continuity. Should anything happen to our— Daenerys set her jaw. We do not need to decide everything tonight. But let us at least swear a vow of mutual respect and non-aggression. We will stand side by side, even if the realm sees two queens. Once we are south again, we can announce a great council, inviting the high lords of every region to meet us in King's Landing. There, we will propose the details of this arrangement. If they balk, we will negotiate. But let us not raise arms against each other. Not now, not after all we face together. A wave of relief swept through Rhaenys. She didn't realize just how much she had dreaded the possibility of confrontation until Daenerys spoke those words. Agreed, she said, and extended her arm. Daenerys clasped it. Neither woman smiled exactly. The moment was too grave. But a sense of renewed determination flowed between them. They parted soon after, returning to their men with the news that there would be no strife between the Targaryen queens. Jon Snow, Tyrion, and the others appeared cautiously relieved. Still, Rhaenys knew the realm would not so easily accept this novelty. Many lords would whisper that one Targaryen was trouble enough, that two spelled chaos. Others might cynically believe the queens would fall into conflict eventually. Skepticism would abound. But if she and Daenerys remained united, it might be enough to guide Westeros into a new era. The next days passed in a whirlwind of activity. The armies were organized into segments, those who would remain at Winterfell to recover, those who would press north to help the free folk resettle, for the threat was ended, but that land was harsh, and the largest group, which would return south to restore the battered realm. Jon Snow chose to remain in the north, though he pledged his ongoing loyalty to both queens if they upheld their vow of peace. Many of the northern lords were uncertain about kneeling to Targaryens at all, but the horror of the undead had at least softened their outright hostility. For the time being, the north would remain under Jon's leadership, though a formal oath of fealty might come later, if the Great Council confirmed the new monarchy. Rhaenys' host, including her Dornish captains, prepared for the trek back. They had lost many good soldiers in the battle. Still, thousands remained, and each morning the yard echoed with the clang of arms and the shuffle of boots as men formed ranks. Daenerys Unsullied likewise gathered, proud and implacable. The two queens agreed to travel together, both for safety and to demonstrate unity, until they reached the Trident, where Daenerys might branch off to address matters in the Riverlands. Or so the plan stood. At dawn on the 5th day following the battle, the combined host finally departed Winterfell. The banners swayed in a crisp wind as the gatehouse lowered its portcullis to allow them passage. Rhaenys rode near the front, flanked by Illyria and a handful of the Dornish guard. Snow still covered the fields in a patchy quilt, but it had softened, turning to slush beneath the horses' hooves. Behind them, the columns of infantry trudged. Daenerys rode a short distance away, flanked by Grey Worm and Missandei, while Tyrion rode between the two queens, occasionally cantering back and forth to convey messages. A few of Daenerys' dragons soared overhead, Regal and Drogon, though their flights were cautious, wings buffeted by northern winds. Viserion had been lost to the Night King, and that wound still weighed heavily on Daenerys' spirits. The journey south was brutal in its own way. Spring had come to the southern regions, but the neck was a bleak marshland, and the roads were poor. Many men fell ill, injuries from the recent battle festering in the damp. Rhaenys herself fought off a fever that threatened to seize her, for her body had been taxed to its limits. When she wasn't coughing from the chill, she was trying to focus on troop logistics. Food wagons often became mired in the bog, forcing diversions. At Moat Cailin, they halted. The ancient fortress stood in partial ruin, but it served as a decent checkpoint. Scouts reported that the path to the Riverlands was passable, though rumors said bandits prowled the countryside. The wars that had convulsed the realm over recent years, the War of the Five Kings, culminating in the near destruction of House Stark, the repeated Lannister campaigns, had left entire stretches of territory lawless. Rhaenys brooded on that, recalling the impetus for her own rise to power. She had wanted to bring justice, not Anarchy. Now, she saw how fragile order truly was. Despite hardships, the group pressed on. One afternoon, the sky overhead shifted from sullen gray to vibrant blue, and sunlight broke through the clouds. As the ground gradually rose out of the swamps, the air grew warmer. Green shoots emerged alongside the road, the first hints of new life. Rhaenys found herself almost smiling for the first time in weeks, comforted by the thought that the darkness in the far north was behind them. Perhaps the whole realm might find a springtime of its own if they nurtured it. When they reached the borders of the Riverlands, they found the region in disarray. The castle at the Twins had changed hands multiple times during the wars. House Frey, once powerful, had been decimated by alliances turning against them after the Red Wedding. Bandits roamed the roads, preying on vulnerable farmers. A large portion of the farmland lay untended, fields gone fallow in the chaos. Yet, there was also a sense of renewal, a desire among the small folk to rebuild, if only they could get some measure of protection. As the Queen's army approached, many of those small folk watched warily from behind fences or half-ruined huts, as if uncertain whether these soldiers were the next wave of conquerors. Rhaenys sent out envoys, bearing the Targaryen sigil and words of reassurance. Some villagers knelt in relief, recognizing that this was not a marauding band but a royal host that might restore order. Others fled, mistrusting any new claim to power. Such was the legacy of war. During this time, Rhaenys and Daenerys hosted daily councils. Tyrion, once again fulfilling a role similar to the Hand of the King. Though officially it was Doran Martell who held the title of Hand to Rhaenys, helped navigate local disputes. They offered clemency to minor lords who had once sworn to one Baratheon or Lannister or another, provided they now bend the knee. In return, the queens promised fair governance and relief from undue taxation. They also encouraged them to send representatives to the upcoming Great Council in King's Landing, where the future structure of the realm would be debated. That promise of a voice in shaping the new order mollified many, though some houses remained aloof, unwilling to pledge loyalty until they saw how power would truly settle. Eventually, Daenerys decided to split from Rhaenys. The Riverlands were large, and Daenerys wished to ride further east to Harrenhal, then down toward the Blackwater, ensuring that no pocket of Lannister loyalists lingered. Rhaenys, on the other hand, would continue along a more direct route, returning to the capital to start the preliminary preparations for the Great Council. Before parting ways, the two queens spoke quietly on a small rise overlooking the waters of the Trident. "I will see you in King's Landing soon," Daenerys said, glancing at the swirling currents. "If all goes well, I might be there in a fortnight. But if the roads are worse than we expect, it could be longer." Rhaenys nodded. She was mounted upon a sturdy Dornish horse, a gift from Illyria's cousins. "Take care," she said softly. "This realm is still riddled with ghosts of the wars. But you have the dragons, and that will deter most trouble." Daenerys' lips twitched in a faint smile. "Yes. Though I'd rather not burn my new kingdom's fields. Let us hope I only need them to deter, not destroy." She hesitated, then added, "We do this so the people see we are not hoarding power in the capital, yes? That we genuinely wish to know the realm's wounds. I believe that is the correct path." "It is," Rhaenys agreed. "The realm has suffered too many lords who care only for their own seats. Let our actions prove otherwise." They clasped hands in a moment of shared resolve. Then Daenerys turned her horse east, leading a portion of the Unsullied and a small retinue of Westerosi knights who had sworn to her after the battle. Rhaenys watched them go, feeling a pang of apprehension. Such separation made sense, but it also left them vulnerable to rumors of splintering. Still, both queens had pledged to keep their vow of unity. The realm might doubt, but for the moment, they would continue forward. Rhaenys' march to King's Landing took nearly 2 weeks. The roads improved as they neared the capital, passing through farmland that had been less ravaged by war. Springtime truly manifested here. Blossoms dotted the trees, bees buzzed amid wildflowers, and the scents of fresh earth and pollen drifted on the breeze. Far from the gloom of Winterfell, it felt like a different world. Yet the city, when it finally loomed in the distance, brought a familiar ache to Rhaenys' chest. She remembered riding into King's Landing at the head of the Dornish spears, the gates opening to her triumph, the hatred and fear in Cersei Lannister's eyes. Now over a year had passed. She herself had left the capital to face the undead in the north. In her absence, Prince Doran Martell had served as regent, overseeing the day-to-day affairs. She prayed he had managed to keep order, for the city was never an easy place to govern. It was a behemoth of a population, filled with poverty and splendor in uneven measure. The gates stood open, though a column of city watch, the new gold cloaks, reformed under Rhaenys' rule, lined the roads to guide her forces in. People thronged the streets, some cheering, some merely staring. Rhaenys picked out the murmurs of the crowd. They seemed curious, uncertain whether to hail her as a savior from the undead or a conqueror returning to tighten her grip. A few shouted her name. Others raised fists in salute. Still others looked on in silent wariness. In the jostle and press, she saw children perched on crates or older siblings' shoulders, wide-eyed at the spectacle of soldiers. Her contingent moved carefully, conscious of the city's delicate mood. They passed flea-infested neighborhoods, winding up the main thoroughfare toward the Red Keep. Once inside the keep's gates, Rhaenys dismounted, letting a stable boy take her horse's reins. Ellaria and her commanders gathered around, many wearing relieved or triumphant expressions. Rhaenys felt only fatigue. The memory of the last time she had been here in force, storming the keep to unseat Tommen and Cersei, lingered. Now she entered as queen, but her sense of victory was tempered by everything she had seen in the north. The keep servants bustled about with anxious welcomes, bowing and curtsying. Rhaenys politely acknowledged them. Prince Doran Martell soon arrived, carried in a wheeled chair by 2 attendants. Time and gout had worn heavily on him. Yet his composure remained regal, and his dark eyes lit with quiet relief at the sight of his niece. "Your Grace," he said, lifting a hand in greeting. "I feared the worst when word came that an undead host had reached Winterfell. We heard little but rumors." Rhaenys approached, bending to touch her forehead to his in a gesture of familial respect. "It was almost the worst," she admitted. "But, by the grace of the gods, or perhaps our own stubborn will, we prevail." She studied his face. "How fares the city?" Doran's expression turned grave. "Relatively calm, though I have spent most of my time placating rival factions. The Tyrells press for certain trade privileges, the Lannisters, what remains of them, remain holed up in their manors, quietly resentful. Some northern envoys arrived a while ago, but they left again, uncertain of your survival. The city itself recovers slowly from the war's devastation. We have begun repairs, but resources are scarce. The crown's treasury is meager." "Nattergal." Rhaenys exhaled. "It was never simple." "You did well, uncle. Thank you for keeping things afloat. We must now prepare for the Great Council. Daenerys will join us in a matter of weeks, and the lords will come as well. We have an opportunity to shape the realm's future, but we also risk igniting fresh conflict if we mishandle the negotiations." Doran nodded. "The Great Council is an ambitious venture, especially with 2 Targaryens vying for the throne. If you'll forgive my bluntness." Rhaenys gave a tired laugh. "I doubt there's a soul in the 7 kingdoms who doesn't see it that way. But Daenerys and I have sworn not to fight each other. We will rule jointly or find some arrangement that satisfies us both. After all, the realm has bled enough." He inclined his head. "Then let us hope the lords follow your example. They can be fractious. Over the last year, representatives from the Westerlands, the Reach, the Stormlands, even the Vale, have all stated competing claims or concerns. They mutter about the cost of war, the security of their borders, the future of the North. And we must not forget the Iron Islands, which remain unruly." "Ito." "Yes," Rhaenys said, remembering the stories of Euron Greyjoy's terror and the uncertain status of Yara Greyjoy. "The Ironborn seldom bend easily. Still, we must try. There's no point claiming a united realm if we exclude entire regions." Together they moved deeper into the Red Keep. Rhaenys glimpsed partial renovations in progress, new tapestries in the halls, fresh plaster where old walls had cracked. Some sections still bore scars from the earlier battles, with charred timbers or collapsed floors. At last, they reached the royal apartments. Rhaenys had them opened, letting light flood in through tall windows that overlooked the city. The day's sun was bright. Below, the harbor shimmered with ships, a testament to King's Landing's continued trade. Despite its troubles, the city was an economic heart that never entirely ceased to pulse. Exhausted from the journey, Rhaenys allowed herself a moment to bathe and rest. She sank into a tub of steaming water, letting out a ragged breath as the tension of the road seeped from her muscles. She closed her eyes, remembering the snowfields of the north, the shrieking of wights, the roar of dragons. How strange to be back in the city of her birth, safe behind stone walls, with a chance to shape the future. For so long, she had been driven by vengeance and the need to reclaim what was taken from her family. But now, she found herself craving peace more than any symbolic victory. After her bath, she dressed in a gown of dark red velvet, the Targaryen sigil embroidered at the sleeves, and pinned up her black hair in a regal style. She was thinner than she had been, the cheekbones more pronounced, a faint bruise still visible at her collarbone from the final battle. But at least she looked somewhat queenly. It would do for now. She had a kingdom to greet, or half a kingdom at least, until Daenerys arrived. In the throne room, she was met by a gathering of courtiers, city officials, and lesser nobles who rushed forward with bows and elaborate greetings. One by one, they pressed themselves upon her, relaying trifling problems and urgent matters alike. She promised to hear them all in turn, but first she ascended the dais. The Iron Throne loomed before her, those twisted swords hammered by dragonfire centuries past. She felt a stab of memory, the day she had claimed it, Tommen kneeling with tears in his eyes. For a moment, she hesitated, remembering the seat's capacity to cut those unworthy. Then she sat, steeling herself. The feel of cold metal beneath her was oddly familiar now. She straightened her spine, surveying the throng. Tyrion was there too, having arrived on the earlier tide from the Riverlands. He pressed a hand to his heart in a respectful gesture. Rhaenys nodded, a fleeting smile gracing her lips. Despite his name, he had proven a loyal counselor, and she intended to keep him close. The day passed in a flurry of petitions. Grain shortages, tax disputes, rebuilding efforts, and the simmering tension among houses that had lost sons in the war. Rhaenys listened, asked questions, and did her best to arbitrate fairly. Prince Doran spoke up from time to time, offering a measured perspective. Tyrion provided keen insights, especially regarding finances. By evening, Rhaenys was drained, her voice hoarse from conversation. Yet she knew it was just the beginning. The Great Council would magnify these concerns 100-fold, as high lords from every corner of the realm came to stake their claims or press for reforms. In the weeks that followed, ravens flew to every major seat: Highgarden, Casterly Rock, the Eyrie, Storm's End, Pike and beyond. Each carried a royal summons, inviting the lords to attend the Great Council in King's Landing. Come the turn of the new moon, each house should send its chosen representative. The letter was signed by Rhaenys Targaryen, first of her name, Queen of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, followed by the flourish of Daenerys Targaryen, first of her name, Queen of Meereen, Khaleesi, of the Great Grass Sea, Breaker of Chains, and Mother of Dragons. One letter, 2 signatures. The message was clear. The realm had 2 Targaryen queens and both expected the Lord's attendance. Daenerys arrived just as preparations for the council entered their final stages. She sailed in on a sleek vessel flying the 3-headed dragon banner, accompanied by Drogon and Rhaegal circling overhead, their shadows passing over the city. The sight caused a stir, half awe and half dread. The people of King's Landing had seen dragons once before, when Daenerys first approached, but they had not grown used to it. Dragon wings over the sprawl of rooftops brought memories of Aegon the Conqueror's fiery subjugation. Yet no flames were unleashed. Instead, the beasts landed in the fields outside the walls, guarded by Unsullied who kept curious onlookers at bay. Rhaenys greeted Daenerys in the courtyard of the Red Keep, the two queens bowing to one another as they had done before Winterfell's battle. Daenerys looked exhausted from her circuit through the Riverlands and Harrenhal, but her face softened with relief upon seeing Rhaenys well. They exchanged a few private words, acknowledging that the real test lay ahead in the Great Council. Then Daenerys took up temporary residence in Maegor's Holdfast, near Rhaenys' own chambers, the two of them forging a shared household, at least for now. In the days that followed, the lords began to arrive. The trickle soon became a flood, each house bringing a retinue of knights, guards, and courtiers. The city's inns overflowed. Tents sprang up on the outskirts, creating a sprawling encampment. The Great Council would be held in the Dragon Pit, an ancient dome that had once housed the Targaryen dragons of old. Though partially in ruins now, it offered more space than the Red Keep's throne room, ensuring that hundreds of lords and their followers could gather at once. Rhaenys and Daenerys labored over how to arrange the seating, how to structure the proceedings. A dais was built near the center for them, side by side, each with a smaller version of a throne. They would invite the lords to speak in turn, addressing the queens together. It was unconventional, but so was having two monarchs. Many whispered that the arrangement was doomed to collapse, others that it heralded a new age. The city bristled with speculation. The day of the council dawned mild, with sunshine that glinted off the bright banners streaming from the city's walls. A procession wound up the hill of Rhaenys, ironically named for her ancestor, not for Rhaenys herself, and halted at the Dragon Pit. People crammed along the streets to see the High Lords pass. The dour-faced Lord Royce of the Vale, the newly installed Lord Glover of Deepwood Motte, the Lady of Bear Island, the representatives of House Tully. The Tyrells arrived in flamboyant style, their carriages bedecked with garlands of roses. The Lannisters came too, Lord Regent Kevan Lannister having died in prior conflicts, so the title passed on to a distant cousin who arrived under heavy guard. There was also the new Warden of the West, a younger cousin of Tywin, uncertain in posture. No small number of eyes lingered on them warily. The Stormlands were represented by a cousin of House Baratheon, for the direct line had been all but extinguished. The Greyjoys were present in the form of Yara Greyjoy, who had escaped Euron's clutches and fought to gain control of her house. The Martells, of course, were led by Prince Doran himself, though he was carried in a wheeled litter, stoic and unreadable as ever. From Dorne also came the Sand Snakes, at least those still living, hovering like coiled vipers near his side, ready to defend Rhaenys' claim if challenged. Inside the Dragon Pit's dome, the air was stifling with the press of bodies and the tension of 1,000 mistrustful glances. Clusters of armed guards lined the walls. Though weapons were discouraged, few dared arrive unarmed. The memory of the Red Wedding, of betrayals at councils and feasts, made every house cautious. Rhaenys and Daenerys took their places on the dais, each wearing the colors of House Targaryen, though Rhaenys' dress hinted at Dornish style, while Daenerys' attire bore the Associ influences she had brought from Meereen. The difference was subtle, yet symbolic. Here were two women who had come from vastly different experiences, standing as equals. A hush spread as trumpets signaled the start of the Great Council. Tyrion Lannister stepped forward as Master of Ceremonies, his voice carrying over the crowd with surprising authority. Lords and ladies of Westeros, esteemed guests, we gather at the command of Her Grace, Rhaenys Targaryen, and Her Grace, Daenerys Targaryen, to determine the future governance of the Seven Kingdoms. Let there be no violence here. Only counsel, so that we may chart a course for peace and prosperity after long years of war. Bah! The hush deepened. 1,000 pairs of eyes fixed on the dais. Rhaenys' heart hammered. She felt the swirl of doubt, hope, and determination. Daenerys glanced at her, offering a small nod. This was their moment. Rhaenys rose first. She spoke clearly, so her voice might carry. My lords and ladies, I stand before you as a daughter of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen and Princess Elia Martell, long believed dead in the sack of King's Landing. But the gods saw fit to spare me. I claimed the Iron Throne to bring justice where it was denied, to repay the debt of blood inflicted on my family and on the realm. Yet I stand here today not to demand your subservience, but to invite your voices in shaping a new realm. I have no wish to rule as a tyrant. I wish only to restore peace and prosperity to these lands. Nami? She paused, letting her gaze sweep the crowd. Yet I am not alone in my claim. My aunt, Rhaenys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, shares my blood and my birthright. Rather than spill more Targaryen blood in war, we have chosen to stand together. Our question to you is this: shall we rule as two queens joined in purpose, forging new traditions to spare the realm further strife? Or do you demand one queen alone? If so, which queen, and why? Speak openly, for we would hear your thoughts before deciding the shape of our monarchy. She sank back into her seat, the crowd stirring with muted whispers. Daenerys rose next, offering a similar address. She spoke of her trials in Essos, her liberation of the enslaved, her dragons, and her rightful claim as the last surviving child of King Aerys Targaryen. She finished by echoing Rhaenys' sentiment, that continuing war would only ruin what little remained. A hush followed her words, broken only by the shuffle of feet and the occasional cough. Then the lords began to speak. One by one, or in small groups, they stepped forward to voice their positions. Some seemed uncertain or cautious, wanting reassurance that their lands would be protected. Others were bolder. Lord Glover from the north said, "I bent the knee to Jon Snow as king in the north, for the north has bled enough at the hands of southern kings. But if Jon Snow now acknowledges you, I ask, will you grant the north some measure of autonomy, or must we be bound to the Iron Throne forever?" Lady Mormont, as fierce as the rumors claimed, added, "We have lost many. My house stands on the brink, yet we remain loyal to the memory of House Stark. The Targaryens once burned our ancestors. Why should we trust you now?" "Them?" Daenerys answered calmly, explaining how the North's loyalty in fighting the dead had won her respect. Rhaenys seconded this, praising the bravery of the northern armies. They offered to consider a new arrangement that allowed the North more self-governance if it remained under the overarching monarchy for mutual defense and trade. This seemed to mollify some northern lords, though not entirely. The Vale demanded to hear how the realm would handle disputes between two queens. What if they disagreed on major matters? Tyrion answered that question by suggesting a small council with delegated powers, and that if the queens reached a stalemate, they would consult that council as a final arbiter. It was a radical notion, but it hinted at some form of checks and balances never before seen in Westeros. House Tyrell seemed amenable, likely because they were eager to maintain their favored status and expand trade routes. The Lannister representatives were more reluctant, privately fuming that Targaryens had undone their power. Still, they were too weakened to openly contest the new monarchy. They asked how they might regain the crown's favor and eventually restore Lannister prestige. Rhaenys responded that loyalty and service to the realm would be rewarded, a subtle nudge that they must accept the new order. Then came Yara Greyjoy, who drew many curious stares with her confident stride and short-cropped hair. She declared that the Iron Islands would only bend the knee if their traditions were respected, specifically their right to choose their own lord or lady through the Kingsmoot. She demanded a measure of independence akin to the North's request, with the Ironborn permitted to sail freely without interference, so long as they refrained from raiding the mainland. Rhaenys, recalling the chaos the Ironborn had sown in the past, exchanged a glance with Daenerys. Daenerys had once forged a pact with Yara, promising independence for the Iron Islands in exchange for their support. That promise had never been formally enshrined. Now it was put forth again, forcing Rhaenys to consider the precedent. Still, they indicated they would discuss it, mindful not to reject Yara outright. On it went. Grievances about seats of power, border disputes, inheritance tangles, each had an angle. Every lord had a cause, whether to reduce taxes or gain royal charters. Rhaenys felt her head spin with the sheer volume of demands. Yet, amid the cacophony, a pattern emerged. Few openly contested the right of House Targaryen to rule. They had witnessed the downfall of the Baratheons, the chaos of the Lannisters. They had seen two Targaryens save the realm from an ancient menace. Despite lingering fears of dragons and old madness, the realm was tired of war. 2 Targaryens, it seemed, might be preferable to endless bloodshed. At last, after days of debate, a measure of consensus formed. The realm would accept a dual monarchy, at least provisionally, if certain conditions were met. A clear line of succession in case one queen died, a structured small council to mediate disputes between them, certain privileges for the North and the Iron Islands, and a vow to limit the use of dragons on domestic soil, except in times of dire threat. The final item was proposed by the Vale Lords and seconded by the Stormlands, who feared the destructive potential of draconic power. Daenerys agreed grudgingly, knowing that brandishing the threat of dragonfire too often would only engender rebellion. Rhaenys supported the measure, seeing it as a necessary trust-building step. The question of heirs, though, remained thorny. Some lords insisted on a single line of inheritance for the sake of clarity. Ideally, a child born of one queen who would be recognized by both. Others suggested each queen might produce heirs, creating rival lines that could share the throne in the next generation. This possibility sparked heated arguments about the inevitability of conflict if there were 2 sets of heirs. In the end, they reached a compromise of sorts. If Daenerys or Rhaenys bore a child, that child would be recognized as primary heir to the Iron Throne. Should both queens produce children, the firstborn of either line would succeed, and the other children might be given positions of high rank, princes or princesses with claims to specific regions, perhaps. The final details were left somewhat fluid, as neither queen was presently pregnant nor wed. Rhaenys found herself in awkward conversation with the Tyrells, who floated potential marriage candidates for her. What about Lord Willis Tyrell? Mace Tyrell ventured, eyes bright with ambition. A good, kind man, though he bears an old injury. He would make a fine consort. Rhaenys deflected politely, saying she must speak with Daenerys before making any decisions, and that a union might risk overshadowing the alliance with Dorne. Privately, she balked at marrying so suddenly. Her life had been a storm of war and retribution. She hardly felt ready to choose a consort purely for political convenience. Still, she recognized the realm's thirst for stability. After nearly a fortnight of intense council sessions, the broad outlines of a new monarchy were set. Both queens would be crowned in a joint ceremony at the Great Sept, or what remained of it, as the faith had also endured havoc. A formal charter would be drawn up, enumerating the powers of the monarchy, the obligations of the lords, and the responsibilities of the small council. The North would receive certain self-governing privileges, as would the Iron Islands, with an oath to refrain from raiding. The usage of dragons would be regulated to external threats, the queens pledging not to unleash fire upon rebellious lords, without first seeking a peaceful resolution. And the question of heirs remained open, but with a recognized protocol in place. Not everyone was satisfied. The arrangement was messy, a patchwork of concessions. Some whispered it would never last. Yet, the alternative, tearing the realm apart yet again, seemed unthinkable. So the lords affixed their seals to the preliminary agreement. Those who opposed it quietly withdrew, likely plotting for some future day when they might exploit the monarchy's dual nature. But for the moment, the realm let out a collective sigh of relief. Peace, however fragile, was at hand. The final day of the Great Council dawned rainy, a gentle drizzle that slicked the streets and turned the Dragon Pit's grounds into mud. Still, the atmosphere inside was lighter than before. The tension had eased somewhat. The dais had been rearranged for a concluding ceremony in which the lords would publicly acknowledge the outcome. Rhaenys and Daenerys took their places side by side, each wearing a crown. Rhaenys's was wrought of dark steel accented with rubies, the design reminiscent of the crown her father Rhaegar had supposedly worn at tourneys. Daenerys was a slender band of Valyrian steel, set with small gemstones that caught the torchlight. A hush filled the vast space as Tyrion signaled for quiet. The lords and ladies stood in a semicircle, their banners draping from the ruined arches of the dome. Outside, the rumble of distant thunder echoed across the city. Daenerys spoke first. "Lords and ladies of the Seven Kingdoms, we have labored long to bring you peace. We faced a common enemy in the north, and now we face the challenge of rebuilding. I stand here not as a conqueror, but as your queen, committed to the prosperity of all. Rhaenys rose, her heart pounding. We share a lineage of dragon's blood, but we also share the blood of Westeros. My mother was of House Martell, my father of House Targaryen. Let House Targaryen stand as a symbol of unity, bridging differences so that no more mothers must weep for children lost to war. They joined hands, and the watchers broke into applause, some sincere, some merely polite. The uneasy alliance had been sealed. In the days that followed, the lords began to depart, returning to their lands with the promise of peace and the knowledge that, for the first time in history, 2 crowned queens now ruled from the Red Keep. Back in King's Landing, the reconstruction efforts intensified. The city needed new aqueducts, new roads, and a reorganization of the gold cloaks. With the monarchy structured as it was, Rhaenys and Daenerys each took on different portfolios, so to speak. Daenerys, with her knowledge of Essos and trade, focused on forging new commercial ties and ensuring the shipping lanes were protected. Rhaenys, who had grown up in Dorne and Braavos, oversaw matters of law, justice, and domestic relations among the great houses. They met daily in council to share progress and address crises. It was an uneasy dance, balancing 2 distinct leadership styles, but for the most part it functioned, helped by the fact that they had a shared vision of a realm no longer haunted by the mistakes of the past. Some nights, they would dine privately in a small solar, a circle of candlelight flickering across a simple wooden table. Over roasted meat and Dornish wine, they'd speak frankly of the day's challenges. At times, they laughed at the absurdities of governance. At others, they sighed under the weight of it all, like whether to pardon certain Lannister bannermen who'd once slaughtered Targaryen loyalists, or how to respond to a Braavos bank's demands for loan repayment. Occasionally they fought, voices sharp with disagreement, but neither let the anger fester. The memory of war's horrors still lingered too vividly. Outside the Red Keep, the small folk gradually grew accustomed to the notion of 2 queens. Street singers composed bawdy songs about the Targaryen cousins, telling tales of the black-haired queen and the silver queen. Vendors sold cheap ribbons in red and black, proclaiming them lucky tokens of the new age. A handful of doomsayers insisted that the arrangement was an affront to the gods, a sign that the dragons would incinerate them all eventually. But for the most part, the city adapted, as it always did, to whichever ruler had the gold, the food, and the soldiers. That summer was one of renewal. Ships from the Reach ferried supplies to King's Landing, fueling rebuilding projects. Stone masons repaired the battered city walls. Gardens were replanted in the palace grounds. Markets bustled. The stench of death and decay receded. Word spread that the nightmares of the army of the dead had been vanquished, though a chill ran through the realm whenever anyone remembered how close they had come to eternal winter. In the midst of this cautious optimism, Rhaenys found herself wrestling with personal unease. Politics demanded that she consider marriage. Already, letters arrived from various houses offering prospective matches: a younger son of House Royce, a cousin of House Arryn, a scion of the Tyrells. The realm wanted a clear path to heirs. Daenerys faced similar pressures. Some whispered that a union between the 2 queens themselves might solve the problem, but Targaryen tradition aside, that seemed too unconventional. Moreover, they both recognized that forging ties with other houses might better solidify alliances. One afternoon, Rhaenys sat in her solar, sifting through missives. The door opened, revealing Tyrion. He gave a polite bow. "Your Grace, might I have a moment?" She beckoned him to take a seat. "Oh, of course. Is there news from the Vale or something else?" He settled into a chair, crossing one leg over the other. "In a manner of speaking, the Vale's shipments of grain are on schedule, but that's not why I'm here." He paused, a thoughtful look creasing his brow. "I came to speak about the matter of your marriage, if you'll indulge me." Rhaenys could not restrain a sigh. "It seems there's no escaping it, is there? Even now, the realm fixates on who I'll wed, as if that alone will secure peace." "Eh?" Tyrion smiled gently. "Forgive me, But you and Her Grace Daenerys have asked me to keep a keen eye on the realm's political currents. And I must tell you that in my estimation, forging a strategic marriage could be a powerful move. Not solely for heir-making, though that's part of it, but for binding certain factions to your cause. The war may be over, but old wounds linger. She set down the letters. Are you advocating for one suitor in particular? He considered. House Tyrell remains a strong candidate. Marrying Willis Tyrell, for instance, would all but cement the Reach's loyalty forever. They remain the breadbasket of the realm, after all. But that path has drawbacks, especially given your familial ties to Dorne. The Martells might resent the overshadowing presence of the Tyrells. Then again, a Martell betrothal is impossible, as Prince Doran is your uncle, and Trystane is a boy, plus he's your cousin. The lines are too close. Merci. Rhaenys' stomach fluttered with a mix of annoyance and reluctance. Is there no path for me to remain unwed for a time? Tyrion nodded sympathetically. Of course you may, Your Grace. No one can force you to the altar. Yet the lords will take your reluctance as uncertainty. If you wait too long, they might fear that the monarchy has no intention of providing a stable line of succession. Daenerys faces similar scrutiny, and if either of you fails to produce heirs, rumor will spin it as a prophecy of chaos to come. Rumor will view fails to come. She rubbed her temples. I know. I loathe that this is how things must be, but the realm is starved for stability. The question is, does Daenerys intend to wed? She once pinned her hopes on a marriage alliance with the Dothraki, but that was a different time. Now, she rarely speaks of it. Precisely. She too finds it distasteful, given her experiences with forced marriage in the past. Yet I suspect she might relent if she finds a match that doesn't feel like a chain around her neck. Tyrion paused, drumming his fingers on the arm of the chair. Might I suggest that you and Queen Daenerys hold a small private council, with Prince Doran and a handful of other trusted advisors, to discuss potential alliances? That way you can weigh the advantages and pitfalls. If nothing else, it will show the realm that you are considering the matter openly. Rhaenys nodded, feeling the tension in her shoulders. Very well. Let us do that. Within days, the private gathering took shape. Rhaenys, Daenerys, Tyrion, Doran, and a few others convened in a chamber kept strictly off limits to eavesdroppers. They hashed out the complexities of prospective unions, both for Rhaenys and Daenerys. Doran weighed in with a Dornish perspective, cautioning that the Martells, who had always harbored resentment against the Tyrells, might interpret a marriage to House Tyrell as a slight. Tyrion pointed out that forging a deeper alliance with the Reach guaranteed a steady supply of food which the city desperately needed. Another suggestion was a marriage to a northern house, sealing the fragile ties to Winterfell. But the North's preference was likely for Jon Snow, though he had no interest in that arrangement. And also, his Targaryen blood complicated matters in ways that only a few knew. Daenerys listened, arms folded, expression guarded. I am not ready to choose a husband, she said. I have obligations in Meereen still. Though I left a council in charge, I can't abandon the city entirely. My heart tells me I should see that the freed slaves remain safe. Until that is resolved, the idea of wedding a Westerosi lord feels premature. Rhaenys, half relieved, half unsettled, said, and I feel no inclination to hasten into a match for purely political reasons, though I recognize the realm's expectations. Perhaps we can delay the question another year, see if the monarchy's stability holds. Doran inclined his head. That is a risk, but it might be wise. The lords will clamor, yes, but if you show that the realm is prospering, their clamor may die down. If in time, a suitable match presents itself, someone who complements your rule rather than undermines it, you will be free to choose. Tyrion exhaled. Then we will counsel patience. But be prepared for the rumor mill. They'll say you've spurned every suitor, that the Targaryen line will end with you, or that you plan to reintroduce the old Valyrian custom of incest. Ignore the gossip if you can. Daenerys glanced at Rhaenys. Let them gossip. We survive the dead. We can survive wagging tongues. A reluctant smile curved Rhaenys' lips. Then it settled. We keep the matter of marriage at bay for now. With that temporary resolution, time pressed on. The realm truly did see an uptick in fortune. Trade caravans traveled more safely. The roads and bridges were repaired. Bandits were hunted down by roving patrols authorized by the crown. Even the north saw a bountiful harvest for once, the soil seemingly enriched after the bitter conflict. The new monarchy grew in credibility as both queens navigated disputes with measured fairness. Yet as the months passed, Rhaenys discovered that ruling was a never-ending labyrinth. Every decision spawned fresh complications. Some lords tested the boundaries of the new structure. A few tried to pit one queen's authority against the others, sending contradictory requests, seeking which queen might grant more favorable terms. But Rhaenys and Daenerys communicated daily, comparing notes, foiling attempts to play them off each other. The more cunning lords learned quickly that the queens were unified. One night, close to a year after the Great Council, Rhaenys found herself pacing a balcony overlooking the city's flickering lights. The heartbreak of the war against the dead had receded, replaced by the quieter heartbreak of day-to-day injustices she could not fully solve. A famine in some corner of the Westerlands, pirates harassing shipping lanes off the Arbor, simmering feuds between lesser houses. She often felt like a gardener struggling to keep a vast field free of weeds, but new weeds sprang up faster than she could pluck them. She leaned on the stone rail, letting the night breeze cool her face. She wore a simple robe, her hair unbound. Far below, the city sprawled like a living organism, torches and lanterns winking in the darkness, the hum of distant voices occasionally drifting up. She wondered what her mother, Elia Martell, would think if she could see Rhaenys now. Would she be proud? Or would she pity the lonely burden her daughter bore? A soft step sounded behind her, and she turned to see Daenerys. The silver-haired queen approached quietly, wearing a thin cloak. "You look troubled," Daenerys said. "Is something amiss?" Rhaenys sighed, turning back to the night sky. "Nothing in particular. Everything in general. Do you ever feel that we fought so hard to get here, only to discover that the real battle is endless? The kingdom is so large, so full of pain. We mend one wound and another opens." "Wes." Daenerys joined her at the railing, gazing out. "I know that feeling well. In Meereen, after I freed the slaves, I thought they would simply embrace their new lives. But old prejudices and power structures returned. I had to learn that freedom is a seed that requires constant watering, or the weeds of tyranny reclaim the soil." She let out a soft laugh. "Now we do the same for Westeros, only on a grander scale." Rhaenys nodded, a rueful smile twisting her lips. "At least we do it together." Daenerys placed a hand on hers, gently. "We have accomplished much, my niece. We ended the Night King. We ended the Lannisters' brutal reign. We prevented a civil war between two Targaryens. Even if the tasks ahead remain endless, we can take solace in what we've already achieved. The realm has not seen such a stretch of relative calm in many years." They stood in silence, side by side. A warm wind stirred Rhaenys' dark hair against Daenerys' silver. Below them, a distant voice sang in a tavern, the melody carrying softly through the night air. A ballad of two dragon queens, or so it sounded. Rhaenys thought about the years that might lie ahead. Would the monarchy truly endure? Would they face more rebellions, or the threat of new tyrants rising from the ashes of old houses? She could not say. But for the first time, she felt a flicker of genuine hope that their grand experiment might work. The realm had bent to two queens out of necessity, but maybe, just maybe, it would come to accept them out of respect and gratitude. Daenerys squeezed her hand lightly. "Shall we take a walk through the gardens? The night is mild, and the moonlight is lovely." Rhaenys gave a small nod. "Yes, I'd like that." They left the balcony, walking side by side through torchlit corridors, passing guards who bowed as they went. The Red Keep's gardens had been replanted with hardy blooms that thrived in summer nights. They strolled along the gravel paths, the hush of the courtyard broken only by the chirping of crickets. For a time, they set aside the burdens of crowns and laws. They spoke of smaller, simpler things. The sweet fragrance of night-blooming flowers, the memory of childhood wonders. Daenerys recounted a snippet of Essosi folklore, and Rhaenys told her about the hidden fortress in Dorne where she had once lived in secrecy. In that moment, they were more than queens. They were kin, joined by a destiny neither had asked for, forging a bond that transcended the iron seat that had once torn their family apart. Morning came, and with it, the swirl of duties began anew. But the memory of that quiet, moonlit walk in the gardens lingered in Rhaenys' mind, a reminder that there was beauty still, even in the shadows of power. Seasons turned. The realm held its fragile peace. Daenerys took a brief voyage to Essos to confirm the stability of Marion's council. Rhaenys oversaw a new wave of judicial reforms, aiming to standardize laws across the 7 kingdoms so that lords could not impose arbitrary justice at will. The small folk slowly regained trust in the monarchy. A generation of children grew up having known only the reign of 2 queens. In the Riverlands, farmland was restored. In the north, the scars of the undead invasion healed, replaced by new alliances. The Iron Islands tested the boundaries of their autonomy, but refrained from major reaving. All the while the question of heirs lingered like a half-forgotten ghost. Gossip speculated daily whether either queen carried a child, yet no swelling belly was observed. Some insisted Daenerys was cursed, or that Rhaenys was too consumed by duty to allow a man into her confidence. Others whispered of a Targaryen penchant for incest, though that was baseless gossip at best. Rhaenys tried not to let it rattle her. She was content to shape the realm's future in the present, forging new roads, encouraging literacy, investing in trade. Perhaps one day, a marriage would make sense. But not yet. Daenerys, returning from Essos, brought unexpected news. She had succeeded in strengthening Marion's new government. The city's Freedmen's Council was functioning well. And perhaps more startling, Daenerys had encountered rumors of dragon sightings in far-flung corners of the east, suggesting that her 3 dragons were not the only living exemplars of their kind. If that were true, then the world was changing in ways beyond their reckoning. But she had no proof, merely travelers' tales. In time, another winter loomed, though less harsh than the last. The harvest was decent, and enough stores were laid in that the capital would not starve. The threat of new wars remained, but none flared into full-blown conflict. The lords remembered the devastation of the White Walkers, the precarious reconstruction that followed. With each passing day, the monarchy's dual presence became more normalized, and a generation of courtiers grew used to addressing both queens with equal reverence. And so, years slipped by. Some of the original players of the War of the 5 Kings passed away. Others disappeared into quiet retirement. Younger voices rose in the council, praising the stability that had emerged. House Martell thrived in Dorne, House Tyrell expanded commerce, and the Lannisters slowly rebuilt their fortunes without returning to open hostilities. The North remained loyal to Jon Snow, who governed as Warden of the North in the name of the 2 queens. The Vale, the Riverlands, and the Stormlands all benefited from the new roads and laws that allowed safer trade. Rhaenys sometimes found herself reflecting on the improbability of it all. She had been a child hidden away in a crate of sawdust, presumed murdered. Now she reigned, not alone but in partnership with a queen who had once wandered Essos in exile. Together, they had broken the cycle of Targaryen vengeance. There had been no second dance of the dragons. Instead, there was a cautious, evolving dance of cooperation. Of course, the future was never certain. There would always be tensions, always the possibility of rebellion or external threats. Yet for every challenge, they had discovered a way to adapt, to channel the realm's desire for peace into supportive alliances. The memory of the long night remained fresh enough in everyone's mind that a relapse into chaos seemed unthinkable. Too many had died to risk a new cataclysm. On a bright afternoon late in that decade of relative calm, Rhaenys emerged onto the ramparts of the Red Keep. The wind caught her black hair, now showing a faint silver strand or two at the temples, a subtle sign of the years that had passed. She wore a sleek garnet red gown, the Targaryen sigil embroidered at her breast. Below, the Blackwater Bay sparkled with incoming ships. She heard the distant clang of the city's bells, a welcoming peal for a trade fleet returning from Dorne. Daenerys joined her, similarly showing subtle signs of age, lines of wisdom at the corners of her violet eyes, though her hair remained silver-white. They leaned on the parapet, surveying the harbor. Drogon and Rhaegal were absent, having soared off to some distant eyrie, but occasionally they would return, shadows cast across the city, reminding all that the Targaryen queen still commanded living fire. "The bay is so busy these days," Daenerys mused, watching the ships. "It's nothing like the deserted ports we once saw, when the war had stripped the realm bare." Rhaenys nodded. "The city thrives. The realm thrives, in large part. I never would have thought it possible when I first claimed the throne. I suppose I should be grateful to be proven wrong." Daenerys placed a hand on hers. "We did this together, you and I. I sometimes think about the line of Targaryens that came before us. So many tragedies, so many mad or cruel kings. Yet here we stand, forging a different path." She smiled, a genuine warmth lighting her features. "If our house's words are fire and blood, perhaps we've tempered them with wisdom and mercy as well." Rhaenys gazed out over the waters. Seabirds wheeled overhead. The gulls' cries mingled with the city's din, a peaceful cacophony of life, the slow, steady progress of humanity. She thought back to her mother, Elia, who had once stood in these halls, overshadowed by the tragedies that befell her. She imagined her mother's spirit, watching over them now, proud that her daughter had reclaimed her legacy without succumbing to the bitterness that threatened to consume it. A soft breeze ruffled Rhaenys' gown, carrying the scent of salt and distant spices from the ships. Closing her eyes, she whispered a silent vow, that she would continue striving to protect the realm from the mistakes of the past, to uphold the fragile dream of unity she and Daenerys had nurtured. And in her heart, she felt certain Daenerys made the same vow, each day and night, each time she recalled how the realm had rallied to defeat the dead, each time she felt a dragon's hot breath on the wind. Such was the legacy of Rhaenys Targaryen, the princess who lived, and Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, two queens bound by blood and a shared vision. Their story was woven into the tapestry of Westeros, a testament that even a house steeped in fire and blood could learn to wield its power with compassion, that even ghosts of ancient feuds could be laid to rest by the courage to stand together. And though the future remained unwritten, for now at least, the realm knew a season of peace and prosperity, the likes of which many had never dared hope to see. And so they stood upon the ramparts, side by side, gazing out over a kingdom reborn. Their banners rippled in the golden sun, red and black, black and red, two queens united under one name, Targaryen. And in the hush between heartbeats, one could almost hear the distant rumble of dragon wings, a lullaby of promise that for all the darkness Westeros had endured, the dawn had indeed come.